And word is we are connected. We're ready to go.
Very good. Thank you very much. So with that, I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is a regularly scheduled meeting for July 12th. Time is now just turned 7:03. As we call the meeting to order, we just want to acknowledge that the lands in which we gather are the traditional territories of the Coast and the Strait Salish peoples. Specifically, we recognize Lekwungen-speaking people known today as the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations, and that their historic connections to these lands continue to this day. We have approval of the agenda. If I can get a motion to approve. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you. We have adoption of the minutes of the regular council meeting of June 28th. Moved and seconded. Any changes or corrections? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. And then we have receipt of the committee minutes. We can do all three, I think, together in this case. So if we just get a motion to receive all three. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any changes or corrections? Comments? Seeing none. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. Moving on to Mayor's remarks. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It seems like a while since we've had a chance to meet, but it hasn't been that long. Good news like the splash park being open and things are nice to see happening in the community as where things are opening up a little bit under phase 3. I really want to just express my appreciation to staff who were able to turn up through the Emergency Operations Center. Our response to levels 1 and 2 didn't need to go to 3, but in terms of the heat wave, being able to provide supports for people in need during those very hot days, and then certainly lots of lessons learned from that to do even better in the future. I just also, on that same note, as we're having these long periods of dry weather and looking at the really substantial fires that are happening all over Western North America, just a reminder that the fire risk is very high in our natural parks as well. And so ask that the public take every precaution when entering those parks to make sure that no fires are started and to report anything that might be a fire as quickly as possible at any time. Also want to just remind everybody that the second round of the Oak Bay Lodge consultation has begun. So just encourage members of the public, both in Oak Bay and around the region, who have an interest. We're looking at multiple different possibilities for various healthcare services to be provided on that space. So your input is very much welcomed. Also just wanted to recognize that this week was the 10th anniversary of Alan Cassidy passing away. He died in office, which is a rarity in this council. And so just recognizing that passing. And also John Cassidy was the fire chief at Colwood, passed away recently, and a very moving memorial happened this weekend in Colwood. I had the opportunity to go and attend that, as did Mayor Haynes, actually, who's joining us this evening, along with a number of other members of federal, provincial, and local government. So just recognizing the contribution that all of our first responders make in this region. So just passing on my condolences to Colwood and John Cassidy's family. I also just going to conclude. Last week, at the very end of last week, the chiefs of 9 local First Nations came together to address the spiraling vandalism and chaos around symbols in our communities, both First Nations and colonial symbols. We've seen it here in Oak Bay. Many Canadian flags that were hosted as part of Rotary's fundraiser were slashed, stolen, or damaged in the night. We saw it, the burning of the totem pole in the Malahat, the defacing and damage to statues, the burning of churches across the country, and then also, in addition to the actions, many threats to First Nations buildings and establishments. And really, there's a sense of fear and concern in the First Nations communities that the work that's been done to work together is being eroded by these acts of vandalism. And so no matter how much frustration and anger are understandable, the violence creates more division and not healing. And their letter really brought that to the fore, and that unanimous message from their leadership that the cycle of violence has to end and that it disrespects the ways of the First Nations was really powerful. I think it shows us a way forward. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to amplify that message. They asked us to do that. I don't think the local media was entirely accurate or adequate in capturing that message. I think it was very clear in the letter that violence, vandalism, hatred, racism, intolerance, we all have to work together to make sure there's no tolerance for any such actions. So I think our council has been very positive in reinforcing that message, and just ask that members of our community do that as well. And I just want to finish by thanking the signatories of that letter. It took real leadership to remind us all that we must work daily to ensure that everyone feels safe and welcome in our communities, to emphasize that the vandalism, the hate speech, and other cowardly acts of destruction can't be tolerated. I just want to acknowledge by acknowledging how quickly those chiefs came together. Say hashka to them. They represented, in that there was more, but the ones who were able to sign the letter that day: Songhees Nation, Siatnu or Beecher Bay, Sauk, Malahat, Sawat, Sartlip, Sakem, Patrican, and Esquimalt nations all signed that letter that day, and I just want to thank them for their leadership, both in their own communities, but also regionally on that front. So that concludes my comments for today. We do have another jurisdiction. The Mayor, Fred Haynes from the District of Saanich, is here to join us today. There's a presentation underway, and I'm not sure if there's any other formal invitation or introduction I should be making here, or maybe I'll just turn to staff to see. Oh, go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Sorry, Mayor, I think that on the new agenda, there's item 6.1, which is new business before Mayor Haynes.
Sorry, thank you. I have to refresh my screen here on where I'm working from right now. So thank you for that. But while it's doing that, I'll trust that you're right, and I'm going to go. Is there any new business from anybody from council at this point? I'm not seeing any, so that's great. Thank you very much for that. So that moves us into 6 point. Let me just bring it up here so I don't fall out of sync.
Item 7.1 is the next item.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My refresh did not adequately work. So give me a second here, if you don't mind, and I will. I'm going to just hit refresh and bring this back up from scratch, and that should fix my issue. And we'll go from here. So 6.1 new business, and we on to 7.1 for welcome Mayor Fred Haynes. So thank you for that. Before I introduce you, Mayor Haynes, Ms. Morden, is there anything else I should be doing here besides introducing? Do we want to make any introduction of this item before I hand it over to Mayor Haynes?
Your worship, no, we are ready to have you hand it over to Mayor Haynes. Okay. I believe staff are on hand here to screen share his presentation.
Fantastic. Well, it is my pleasure to welcome Mayor Haynes to our meeting. Mayor Haynes and I have a chance to work together on a number of issues around the region, and it's always a pleasure. But this is the first time I've actually had the first time I've welcomed any mayor to our table here at this table. So welcome, Mayor Haynes.
Well, thank you very much, Mayor Murdoch. Can I just confirm that you can hear me?
We can hear you very clearly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, it's a privilege to be able to join Mayor Murdoch and the Oak Bay Council and any residents who may be listening, and of course, staff. I prepared a slide presentation to talk you through some of the items that are at risk with the Kings Community Natural Green Space. There's a series of slides, but these are in supplement to my report, which gives you more detail, some of the background on the finances and the policy documents that this opportunity speaks to. Could we go to the next slide, please? So here we see an ask, a contribution of 250,000 to 400,000 from Victoria, and if you could consider 60,000 to 90,000 from Oak Bay. This is part of a community goal that was asked by council to the community of 2.75 million. And the root of that was towards the purchase price of 5.5 million for the lands that's known as the Kings Community Green Space. Some people called it the hydro lands, and I'll be presenting on that in a moment. The land is secured, we have purchased it, but the question is, can we keep it in its entirety and protect it from development and keep it as a natural green space for the future of our communities, not just today, but for generations to come. The importance of today's conversation is that Saanich Council saw it important to go to Victoria and Oak Bay before we look at the potential of using the 1.75 million that was raised from a land sale to the CRD that is in public knowledge now where we were unsuccessful at the CRD in getting the consideration of a regional park, but Plan B that was actually suggested by the CRD staff and then agreed to by Saanich staff and council was for us to sell them some land close to the landfill, which allowed them to do some expansion. So that is in our land sale budget, but before that's considered, council wanted to check in with Oak Bay and Victoria on what they may be able to contribute. And this has actually stemmed from some earlier conversations at the CRD, because while it was not considered as a regional park, as an asset, it was considered probably as a sub-regional, which would be those municipalities that might benefit. Could we go to the next slide, please? Here you see a graphic showing a map, and you see the blue line, which is the Lochside Trail, and then you see the red line, which is the Galloping Goose Trail, and then you see the orange line, which is the ENN Rail Trail. And down in the far left-hand corner is the wonderful district of Oak Bay. And to some extent, you're denied access to those trails because we have yet to complete what we would call the Bowker Creek Regional Trail. I think Oak Bay, Victoria and Saanich have that in our long-term plans, and it's certainly part of the blueprint for the Bowker Creek restoration, which is actually a 100-year plan, but we hope to do it in less than that. And I have to say with admiration that Oak Bay has shown real leadership in what to do with the reaches of Bowker Creek that are in your jurisdiction. That pink sign shows you where the Royal Jubilee Hospital is, and that's quite important in part of today's presentation. Could we go to the next slide, please? As we drill down, the King's Community Natural Green Space is in what we call the panhandle of Saanich. So in actual fact, it's just across Richmond Road from Victoria, and it's a short distance away from Oak Bay. That blue line you see running through there is the Bowker Creek, and that you see also indication of the Royal Jubilee Hospital. That Bowker Creek is something that we think of as an emerald necklace running through Oak Bay, Victoria and Saanich, and the King's Community Natural Green Space could represent the beating heart of that. Because if we can achieve some work there, which we believe we can, it would have huge benefits downstream into Oak Bay as well as upstream. Could we go to the next slide, please? Here's a closer look. You see we're bounded by Kings, Haultane and Richmond. But what's nice there is you see that a large portion of the green space is tree covered. There's some that's a sort of open meadow, and then there's trees along the side. And what we know from all the applications that the fundraising committee has been working on for 2.5 years is that capital acquisition of land is very difficult for funding groups to support. But in terms of restoration and management of green space, there are many other opportunities. And the Kings Road fundraising community has been very active in that, and I'll touch base on that later. But what we're on today is the pivot point in securing substantial funding to preserve this as a green space for future generations. Today, we heard Mayor Murdoch talk about the importance of our First Nations. And something the First Nations talk about is shared lands, shared spaces, and they talk about waterways as the veins of life. And we do know that we share our watersheds. So really, while this asset is in Saanich, it's really a shared resource. And I think that's a lovely way to think about it. Next slide, please. Here you see another picture. It's the same location, but it's taken at a different time of year. So you can see the amount of forest there. Which is substantial. And there's a mystery, there's a wonderful mystery of nature inside that forest. And the importance of that is that it's almost a wilderness forest right in the heart of Saanich, Oak Bay and Victoria residential capture area. Next slide, please. What do I mean by that? Well, if we look at the bottom two slides, they're slides I took from Mount Dargan Centennial Park. I had some other slides with no names on, and I was going to ask people the question, which is which? And the top two slides, you see Kings Road. That's a view through the forest understory there from either end. You see it's an amazingly wild-looking space. Next slide, please. Here you see children and their families going on an adventure into that treed green space. And if you've had the opportunity to walk it, there's a wonderful alley or roadway between a series of trees that go down like a Roman colonnade, where you start to be drawn into the wonder of nature. And unlike many of our parks, which are manicured and maintained, if you like, with ornamentals, the vision for this park is to keep it as natural and wild as possible. Why would we do that? Well, let's find out what these children would be looking at. And the park is visited regularly to look at some of the wonders you're about to see. Next slide, please. Here you see the Bowker Creek. which is something that Oak Bay has really shown leadership on. And in the past, you've been able to lever your own resources by accessing other monies, particularly, for example, the Provincial Capital Commission. So you've done very, very well for your taxpayer base, but the reason you do that is because you understand the value of the Bowker Creek. Next slide, please. And when we look at the Bowker Creek, it's actually alive and teeming. Here you see an otter. These are all photographs taken in the past 12 months. An otter in the Bowker Creek. It would only be there if it was looking for food and finding food. Next slide, please. Here you see a blue heron in the Bowker Creek. Similar story, looking for its daily meal. Next slide, please. And here you see some of the celebrities that you've heard about in the Kings Community Natural Green Space, the owl population. And there's a bit of controversy about use of rodenticides, and that an owl can eat over 1,000 rodents a year, but unfortunately they're dying from rodenticides. That's not today's story, but it is part of the story in terms of preserving this area for natural habitats for our wildlife. Next slide, please. Here's another one of those remarkable owls, and people walk in there and you can see the owls almost daily. Next slide, please. And here's an owl eating a crayfish, and that's very rare to see. It's unusual to see that owls will eat crayfish, and this was taken just a few months ago. Next slide, please. Here you see at the other end of the trail across Haultain is the Royal Jubilee Hospital. And this is the start of the trail that leads north from the hospital. As you probably know, there's a 2015 campus plan for the Royal Jubilee Hospital to enhance their own green space and vegetation. That's on a different site to the King's Park green space, but we think it offers the contiguous approach that we're looking for. Next slide, please. Here you see the continuation of that path, and this is the type of path we could certainly get grants for to upgrade. Next slide, please. Here you see the view from the other end of the park with the Royal Jubilee in the far distance, and this is that meadow area. And you see it's rugged and wild, but it can be enhanced and needs to be enhanced, and we can only do that if we secure it in perpetuity. The motion at Victoria actually had a condition that they would give up their 250,000 this year with the possibility of 150,000 next year on two conditions that are primary. One, that the land is protected by covenant in perpetuity, which I think would be important for the residents of Oak Bay to know. And secondly, that Oak Bay was able to contribute. So your contribution wouldn't only help us unlock the monies in Saanich, but also unlock the monies that have been offered in Victoria. Next slide, please. This has been a 3-year journey to get to this space. This is a photo taken in the election time of 2018. You may recognize some people there, but there is a 2,500 plus petition from residents to say we need to preserve this space for now and for the future. That is the largest number of people ever to sign a petition for a park space in Saanich's history. In the Panhandle region, we have a 25% deficit of parks, and we believe that similar in Victoria. That was mentioned in their council meeting, and I believe it may be similar in the close area of Oak Bay. When we look at the Panhandle, when we look at 500 meters from the center of the green space, by percentage of capture of area, that impacts 24% of the area is Oak Bay, 44% is Saanich, and 32% is Victoria. And the petition was signed by residents of all 3 municipalities. If we go to 1,000 meters, then it's 28% capture for Saanich, 29% for Oak Bay, and 43% for Victoria. So when we look at this as a sub-regional park, we do see clear, measurable benefits for the residents of Oak Bay, directly to the park, and in addition to the benefits from the Bowker Creek reaches that go from King's Space down to the waterfront in Oak Bay. Next slide, please. Here's another shot of the happy enthusiast looking forward to doing fundraising. That's just a fraction of the community, and they are there and ready to help us restore this nature space, including that reach up towards Jubilee Hospital and beyond. And we're closely allied with the Friends of Bowker Creek, which you know are taking on with Soren and the Friends the whole of the reach of the Bowker Creek from its inception at its headwaters at the University of Victoria right down to the ocean. Next slide, please. And here we see Rebecca Sterrett, who's one of the leaders here, Save Kings. And if you look at that picture there, and then next slide, please. This is where it all started. It started with Oak Bay. This is a journey that was started by your residents, students saying preserve the park between Hultane Street and Kings Road. And there you see a high school student, Maya Green, over 2 decades ago in a very similar posture, which was accidental, by the way, and in a very similar location at Kings. So I'm hoping that it's been a relay race. I have to say, Kevin, Mayor Murdoch and Council, that you guys started this and we've joined the rally call. So I'd like now, if I may, to hand it over to Council for deliberation. I'm not sure if you had a report that comes in the agenda, but I'm here to answer questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mayor Haynes, and thanks for the presentation. We are we don't normally have public input on presentations, but you know, if people do wish to address council on this, you're welcome to do so. You can raise your hand within the Zoom meeting, or you can call into the number that's on the agenda package. For the most part, there is a report. Basically, the recommendation is that if council is inclined to support this, that it go away to and come back with a formal report from staff that would outline how that funding could be applied, et cetera. So with that, I'm happy. There's lots of hands just popped up, so I'll go with them in the order I see them, which is Councillor Braithwaite, Councillor Nathan, Councillor Zelka. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you so much, Mayor Murdoch, and thank you very much, Mayor Haynes, for your presentation. It's great to see the support of green space in our region. It's such a good thing. So thank you for bringing this forward. I do have some questions around the financial aspect of this. When I read the information that was before us, it looked to me that you are looking to raise just over $1 million. Is that correct?
The total amount to raise is 2.75.
Right.
The community have raised 36,000 before COVID came, and many of the plans for raising money were put to one side, not only because of COVID, but because many of the people involved in fundraising turned their attention to raise monies for first-line healthcare workers and other good causes. Also, there was a fatigue in fundraising for other causes. The total amount is 2.75. 36,000 has been raised by the fundraising committee. Saanich has put aside 1.7 million that would go towards that. And we're waiting to hear back from Victoria, which have agreed to give 250,000 this year. And what they did with a motion from one of their council members, Councillor Andrews, Stephen Andrews, was to put forward a motion that they would look at an additional 150,000 in their next budget year. One of the things we're sensitive to is coming out of COVID is that budgets are constrained. So they're on the, if you like, on the potential hook for the full 400,000, but they have committed 250. The ask today Oak Bay is to consider 60,000 to 90, but it's really up to you how that lands with you. If it's the same or more, then that will you. But if you put those numbers together, if we get all those monies, we'd be within striking distance of $600,000 to $500,000 of the full amount.
Right. So and that would be, if I may continue, Mayor Murdoch, that would be my question to you, Mayor Haynes, is that when I did the math, I figured that with the 1.75 that Saanich is putting in, and the 250 and the potential 60 from Oak Bay, and then the 36 that's already been raised, that's about 34% of what you're still looking to raise, so which would end up being about 650,000 that you were still looking for. So my question would be is, where would you hope to get that money from? Because that's a lot of money to raise in a very short period of time.
Well, two things on that. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. The community will continue their fundraising, but we're also hoping that people can be generous. We've been tried to present a reasonable amount in our ask, but really it's unknown. The fundraising period has been extended for another year through to April 2022, and then we would have a look again at where we are. But you're absolutely right, it's an unknown territory, but one thing we will be doing with the motion from Victoria is working with our staff to bring forward a covenant that the property will be protected in perpetuity pending the successful fundraising.
Thank you. And then I think Mayor Murdoch, perhaps, I guess that in the information that was been presented to us today from the staff is suggesting that we get more input from staff. And what I would be looking for if we did go down that route would be where this money would come from. Would it be from taxes? Would it be, would grants money be able to be looked at to help to pay for something like this? Because I mean, if it's $60,000 and if staff end up saying that would come from our tax base, then that's 0.25% of taxes. So I think we have to take that into consideration as well. So I'll be interested to hear what my fellow councillors say, and then at the appropriate time, I'd be happy to make the motion.
Great, thank you very much, Councillor Braithwaite. I see members of the public raising their hands to speak, and I'll get to you, but I'm just going to go to questions from members of council first, and then I'll go to the members of the public. So go ahead, Councillor Ney, then Zelka, then Green.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Welcome, Mayor Haynes, and thank you very much for that overview. Some good history there. I remember this like yesterday when Maya Green came and protected that, took a leadership role to protect that green space from being a parking lot. And I really appreciate the leadership role that you're taking here now to create these partnerships in the interest. It's a real jewel of a piece of land where it's located, and really benefits a lot of people who live nearby and otherwise. So my question to you is, I noticed on Saanach's agenda, you've been talking about dog parks, actually, which is on our agenda this evening as well. And being a built-out community, much more even than what Saanach is, we're really constrained around that. I'm just curious, any thought? I know you're here to talk about money and not necessarily specific use, but I'm wondering going forward, would there be any possibility of, a consideration of a pocket? I know this is a controversial issue, Mr. Mayor Haynes, but has that been discussed, or would that be on the table, or is that a discussion point in the negotiations at all?
Thank you, Councillor Ney. You don't have to answer that, Mayor Haynes. Yeah, I certainly let you answer it if you're willing to.
So Mayor Murdoch, I will come into that because I do understand it's the third rail of community politics where no one touches the dog issue, but I think it needs to be touched. I think it needs to be not run away from. And I'm actually, again, I admire Oak Bay for stepping up and taking it on. Saanich is trying to do the same. And what we are in the process of now is going through a public engagement to actually look at our 170 parks and how do we have a place in there for all stakeholders. Right now, the pressing crisis for this park is if we can't raise the money, there is a suggestion that some parts of it may be sold off for development. And that would mean in 2021 and 22, we would be paving over park, which we don't want to do. That said, once it's fully protected, it would fall under that umbrella, I imagine, of being considered in the collective of the 170 parks that Saanich have in terms of shared use with all owners. And that would, of course, include dogs. Would it include the type of approach which we're piloting? You may have heard of the off-leash pop-up parks we're trying, which have proved to be very popular. We have a problem right now at Cadborough Bay Beach, which you're aware of, where we have a conflict between the federal nature sanctuary regulations and Saanich's off-leash policy that is being addressed. All these things are in flux, Council and Mayor. Where it will land, I don't know, but absolutely, I can confirm that it will be part of the conversation pending our successful protection of this land.
Thank you, Mayor Haynes. Go ahead, Councillor Ney. Anything else you wish to add? Okay, then we have Councillor Zelka, then Green.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you so much, Mayor Haynes, for your presentation. It's so good to see you again, and it's so good to talk of another collaboration between Oak Bay and Saanich and possibly with Victoria. I'm reminded of the Royal and Macpherson Theatre and how Victoria, Saanich, and Oak Bay collaborated to save that theatre by throwing into a pot and buying it up, and now the CRD is running it on our behalves. Also, the Bowker Creek Initiative, how we're all working together on that, and I definitely look forward to working together with Saanich on this initiative moving forward. I did want to ask, is there any discussion yet, or any idea as to what the agreements might look like, or is really just trying to secure the funding, and then sort of take it from there?
So if I may, through Mayor Murdoch, great question. Right now, it's a case of securing the funding, and what we think is the simplest way is just an outright donation to help us secure the successful full purchase of it. So we have purchased it, but so secure it so we don't have to sell off a piece of the land for other uses. On the point of collaboration, you may also know that the agreement between Oak Bay and the Saanich Police Department is being held up province-wide of effective ways for municipalities to collaborate on policing as well as the other items you've mentioned.
If I may, Mayor, continue.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Very briefly, I was going to touch on the dog issue as well. I presume, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that since Saanich has purchased it, it's now part of the Saanich Park system, and I can bring my dog or a cat to go for a walk today?
Correct.
Thank you.
All right.
Well, on a leash.
On a leash. Okay.
Thank you.
We've got to be clear. Councillor Green, then Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Murdoch, and through you to Mayor Haynes. Mayor Haynes, thank you for a great presentation. Really like the slides. I think it really puts into context what we're actually saving. I mean, we collectively as communities, and also in the context of climate change, this becomes even more valuable to the area. I just wanted to ask about the funding models. So at the moment, you're looking for a single donation from Oak Bay and Victoria. What is, have you put any thought to, or do you have any way of describing what sustainable funding might look like going forward? I'm assuming that these donations are once only donations that you're requesting, but how do you see a sustainable funding model going forward to secure the park in perpetuity? Thank you.
Very good question, and I'll just make some feedback on your first remark. The value of this as a natural space so close to our residents cannot be underestimated, especially during climate change, but the equity of young families being able to just walk down the street and find nature that we saw on their doorstep is remarkable. They do not have to drive out to the hinterlands or to the regional park. It's right there within minutes from the residents of Oak Bay. So thank you for that. In terms of the funding, this is a one-time ask. The go forward funding, there's not going to be a request to Oak Bay. It's to make sure that we can secure 100% of the green space. Once that's done, we're fairly aware of a large number of grants that can be applied for, particularly for watershed and riparian area restoration. There is a committed group that will go forward and help to fundraise on that side. Once it becomes fully secured, Saanich staff will be looking at what can be done there, working with the community. Right now, we do have a number of groups they called Pulling Together. You've experienced them yourselves, where community gets together and restore sections of the Balco Creek. That would happen here. It would also happen with the other areas of the park. Saanich has undertaken in its climate change initiative to plant 2,000 trees per year. That's a great number of trees. And I don't see any reason why this location couldn't be one of those locations that gets the benefit of those trees. The other piece is that we know that maintenance of a park is much higher when you try to have a cultivated or manicured park. This is supposed to be a natural state park, and there's lower budget levels for that are required. So we do think it's going to be manageable within the Saanich budget. However, Councillor, if you felt Oak Bay would like to participate and contribute, we wouldn't say no.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Mayor Haynes.
That was very clever. Yeah. Thank you. Anyway, thank you for answering the question, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I have Councillor Patterson next, and then before I go back to any second time speakers, I'm just going to go to the public, and I'll call on you by the phone number that's showing if your hand is raised. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and through you to Mayor Haynes. Thank you very much for the presentation, Mayor Haynes. It was great. I particularly like the way you brought the ball back into Oak Bay's court, where it was served from. Very, very skillfully done. So nice play. But we've talked about the funding that is needed to secure this space, and I often do walk those trails. So it is an amazing space, and I'm very familiar with it and greatly appreciate it. I know also that Saanich is involved in the value of the natural assets in their community. And so we've talked about the funds that are needed to secure this and protect the land. I'm just wondering if there are any comments on how it is being evaluated on the value of it as a natural asset, and how that might continue being reported on, provided that we can successfully go forward in protecting this land. Thank you.
So if I may, through the Mayor, Councillor Patterson, that line of inquiry that you're talking about talks to what we see around the world in large urban centres, is where hospitals are turning and creating natural space assets for the mental wellness of the patients, the staff, and the residents. So I think what there is a growing awareness around the world, particularly near hospitals such as the Jubilee Hospital, which, as we know, has the cancer ward, where natural state parks are in fact one of the highest orders of values versus a manicured park. So the whole intent of the community around this, and this has been expressed to staff here through a number of community presentations, it's been expressed through the Mayor's fundraising committee to Council, and Council is fully aware, as we look at this park, to keep it in a natural state. This is aside from the budgetary questions which I was mentioning earlier. It's not budget free, of course. However, the value of having a natural state park for people to sit in the healing embrace of the nature assets that you see there is a top priority. And certainly that is something that we will be singing from the rooftops as we go forward.
Thank you, Mayor Haynes.
Thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you. I have Councillor Appleton as another first-time speaker, and then I'll go to the public. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. Just wanted to extend my thanks as well to Mayor Haynes for the presentation. Thank you so much for taking your valuable time to come and speak with us tonight. One of the things I concur absolutely with the comments made about the value of the green space as a natural asset, but I also take note of your comments with respect to regional connectivity for active transportation. So I was wondering whether you might elaborate a little bit about how Saanich considers the space in terms of connectivity for an active transportation network.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Go ahead, Mayor Haynes.
Thank you. Through Mayor Murdoch, if I may. Thank you, Councillor Appleton. I think what you're talking about there is something that resonates for all three municipalities, in that the critical importance of all ages and abilities active transportation. Within Saanich, we have what we was calling a 30-year plan, now 25 years, because we've increased our investment in our climate action plan. Is to start building the connections between the missing pieces. We have a series of bicycle paths and sidewalks, and what we're seeing is missing links. And certainly this part here is a missing link, not only for Oak Bay to get up to the Lochside Trail and the Galloping Goose, but others. Now, some of this is in the green space you see there. If you cross the road to the school at the upper reach there, where I was just there on Friday, where we had a Be Close to the Creek musical, pedal powered. It's a long-term plan, but I think once we got this in place, we can certainly start to coordinate with Oak Bay how we're going to help Oak Bay residents and Saanich residents have a more interconnected opportunity. Right now, I don't have specifics about how we're going to do that, except to say that Saanich has a all points plan, and it's a case of addressing priorities. We are the second largest geographic municipality in BC. We have a lot of work to do in that space, but certainly getting this asset secured would be a significant part of that. The greenway itself, if you walk along it, you'll see that some of it is fenced off, and it's very hard to see how we would put a trail in there. But once we've secured it and start to do the restoration along the different reaches, I'm sure that that will be something that we can be in discussion. But right now, I don't have specific answers to the question, except that it fits with the general principles and policies of what we see as the future of Saanich and the future of Saanich's relationship with Oak Bay.
Thank you, Mayor Haynes. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Oh, thank you very much for that, Mayor Haynes, and I will let you proceed, Mayor Murdoch. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We have a big agenda tonight, so I do want to make sure we get through things, but I also want to give the public a chance to address as well. I'm just going to call it by the last 4 digits of the phone number that are showing on screen. You can hit *6 to unmute when I do that. So the last 4 digits of 1228 have their hand raised. That's 1228. If you can hit *6, that will unmute you, and and *9 will release your hand as well. Welcome to the meeting. If you could give your name and municipality of residence, and then you're welcome to address council.
Perfect. My name is Maya Green, and I currently hi. I currently am a resident of Saanich, actually, and as you know from the presentation, I was a resident of Oak Bay and grew up in Oak Bay. Went to Oak Bay High and was the person in the newspaper article that Mayor Haynes showed, and we laughed about doing the same pose as each other. I'm just here for obvious reasons. I just wanted to share my own values and sort of where I'm at now in my life. And I'm a new mom now, and I feel the exact same way as I did, weirdly, when I was in grade 10. So I still feel that is the most unbelievable piece of property to have in the middle of a residential area, in the middle of an urban area. And I'm so grateful that it was protected when I created that petition back in grade 10. And I feel very fortunate that sort of worked. And then mostly I feel incredibly grateful for the people who've put in so much work since then to keep it preserved and to keep it the way it is. And I just get so excited and so happy at the idea that it could be purchased and actually saved as a wild area, even restored, and all the different uses that people have been discussing. I think it's just so incredible. I love taking my daughter there. She's just turned 1. It's just such a magical place. And I mean, for me, one of the reasons I actually moved to Saanich was to be close to large trees. I live near 10 Mile Point, and there's trails and trees, 2 seconds from my doorstep. And I think it's just so important for people's mental health, physical health, to find shade in the middle of climate change caused heat waves. It's just absolutely precious. I think I would just urge Oak Bay to remember its roots and contribute the absolute maximum that you can. And hopefully we can kind of have this preserved once and for all, and then all of the details of figuring out how it's best used can come. But yeah, let's get this land saved. It's been 20 years, but actually 100 or some odd that people have actually been doing this, but 20 years since me. So yeah, thank you for giving me the time, and best of luck with the rest of the meeting.
Thank you very much, Ms. Green. That's appreciate you calling in. Your phone was unmuted briefly, and I think we heard the children, your daughter, in the background there at one point. So it's nice to hear your voice. And have a great
yelling
evening.
Mama repeatedly. Thank you so much.
All right. I don't see any other hands. Good night. Any other hands raised from the public? Ms. Morden, is there anybody else from the public who's indicated they wish to speak at this time?
There's no hands raised, Your Worship, but we do have another caller with the last 4 digits, 4935.
Okay, if they hit *9, you can raise your hand, and that'll pop up on my screen as well. So I'm not seeing that hand raised at this point. I'll go back to council for discussion. I had Councillor Ney had her hand up, I think, and then Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor Ney, you're just...
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, that
Okay.
was left over. I apologize. Okay, sorry. No, I don't have anything right now.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, if Ms. Morden, can you just mute the phone line again? Thank you. I then Councillor Braithwaite, then Green.
I'm actually prepared to make the motion, if I might.
Go ahead.
To make the motion that the letter from the District of Saanich dated June 7th, 2021, requesting $60,000 to $90,000 in capital funding from the District of Oak Bay for the protection of Kings Road Community Nature Green Space be received and referred to staff for a report on the associated financial options and implications.
I will second that.
Moved and
Councillor
seconded.
Green.
Just to be clear, we're only making this motion if we're in support of the idea in principle. Obviously, there's no point in doing this without that general direction. So I don't want that to be read as anything other than moving it forward at this point. Thank you. So it's moved and seconded. Any further discussion on that? Not from the mover. Councillor, nope, hands are down. So go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is through you probably to staff. I'm just wondering whether staff have a sense of timeline because we are going to go on summer break here. So I'm just wondering what the timeline is for potentially returning those options.
Sure, thank you. I don't know, Mr. Payne is with us right now, or if this would go to him. Ms. Varela, you just unmuted yourself. I'll go to you.
I don't believe Director Payne is on the line, Your Worship, but this would be prioritized. I know he's working on a couple other big reports, but I can discuss that with him and get back to Council ASAP.
Thank you. It's not going to be a giant report. I think it's really just capturing what our options are for sources of revenue, et cetera, for that. So anything else, Councillor Appleton?
No, thank you, Your Worship.
All right, thank you. I see the motions on the floor then. I don't see any other hands up, so I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed? That carries. Mayor Haynes, thank you so much for your time this evening. Enjoy the rest of your night. We have, I think, a few hours of work ahead of us, so we're going to let you go and get on with that work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to item number 8.1. We have a report from Mr. Herman on the Oak Bay chiller replacement for Recreation Center. Mr. Herman, welcome. This is a fairly straightforward report.
Thank you. Thank you, Worship. Can you hear me?
We can. Welcome.
Thank you. Council may recall that the replacement of the chiller at the Oak Bay Rec Center is in the financial plan, and we were successful in obtaining a grant earlier from the Community Economic Recovery Infrastructure Program, the CERA program. So as part of getting that project underway, we recently undertook a tendering process for this work, which closed on June 28th. 2 submissions were received and opened on June 28th. Those submissions are noted in the report with the in order of price. The lowest price bid is from Fraser Valley Refrigeration for $403,000 and change. That is within budget, including some contingency. There was a thorough review of both submissions from our procurement consultant, from our refrigeration engineering consultant, and from staff. And the low bid was considered compliant, and Fraser Valley Refrigeration is a well-known refrigeration company capable of doing this work. So the recommendation to council is to receive the report and to award the work to replace the chiller to Fraser Valley Refrigeration in accordance with their submission and amount noted.
Thank you very much, Mr. Herman. Are there any questions of Mr. Herman at this time? Go ahead, Councillor Patterson, and then Councillor Appleton.
Thank you. Thank you for the report, Mr. Herman. Just a couple of quick questions. The grant funding, of course, exceeded slightly the estimated cost of the project. And just for clarification, the grant funding is any of the under amount is not surplus to the district. Is that correct? Or do you get the full grant, and if you underspend, you keep the rest of the money?
Mr. Herman?
Thank you, Worship. 2 things. There are other costs other than the construction costs as part of this project. I did note a couple of consultants that are working on this project on our behalf, so there are costs associated with their work. If we come in under budget and do not spend all of the grant funding, the agreement that we have says that they may ask for that money to be given back. So I'm not entirely sure what to say with respect to what may means, but certainly I think we would anticipate that that's a possibility.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. If I can just, another quick question. When the equipment is replaced, is the leak detection system, is the new leak inspection or leak detection system also installed with the new equipment?
Mr. Herman?
Your Worship, there's a bunch of ancillary work that's going along with just the straight chiller replacement, and it's all, a majority of it is to upgrade safety issues and also efficiency of the chiller. So we were happy to see that the low bid came in on budget or under budget, so that we don't have to consider a reduction in the scope. So yes, that will be a very modern and safe system.
Excellent, thank you. Those are all my questions, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton, and Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I essentially have the same question as Councillor Patterson, but just as a bit of an extension from that, and staff may not be in a position to answer this question, but I'm assuming that the grant was applied for essentially a very specific and particular project. So given the fact that the comments by Mr. Herman in terms of the balance, you know, there are being other charges that the grant is being applied to. There's probably not an opportunity then to, if there is a balance in the grant monies after all that's taken care of, to apply some of that to a similar project. Basically, this grant is confined to this one project, and we wouldn't be able to apply that to something of similar nature. We would just have to hand it back if it wasn't spent on this particular project. Do I have that right?
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Mr. Herman?
Thank you, Worship. Yes, correct. That's the way our agreement reads.
Thank you. Now, I was sort of hoping that they would consider the creek in a park as being sort of chilling. We count that. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair. A question through you to the Director of Parks, Rec and Culture. And Mr. Herman, thank you so much for an excellent presentation. And I'm quite intrigued with the fact that the new system will be more efficient and will increase safety as well. I presume part of the aspect of the ammonia has to do with the 2018 accident that occurred in Fernie at their Parks, Rec and Culture area with respect to the chiller issue there and ammonia. With respect to safety, could you just share with us a little bit of some of the safety aspects that will be added to our system?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Go ahead, Mr. Herman.
Thank you, Worship. Generally, I can. Some of it is beyond my technical expertise, but certainly the big thing, or one of the big things, is we're going from a shell and tube chiller to a plate chiller with a significantly reduced ammonia charge. So if there ever was an unfortunate leak, the amount of ammonia that we're talking about is significantly reduced. There's also just the safety things that have been included there, and this is where I'm getting into an area where our refrigeration engineer would be better to speak to that question. But there's a number of ancillary parts to this project. Some are safety related. One is to do with replacement of a stack, but there are also some that are energy efficient related, some variable drive motors and things like that. So it's a combination, but certainly if council wishes, I can research the more technical aspects of the safety parts of the project and circulate that.
Thank you, Mr. Herman. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you for that. I being a bit of a nerd, I would be fascinated, but I don't want to bore the rest of council with those sort of details. So we could take that offline. I did want to. One last question is with respect to ongoing, I guess year-over-year charges. Approximately what difference in charge will it be? I guess operating charges for the old chiller versus the new chiller. If you could possibly just give an idea of what the ongoing, I guess, maintenance or ongoing operating costs will be for the new chiller in comparison to the old.
Thank you, Councillor. Just before you answer that, Mr. Herman, I'm just going to point out, if anybody from the members of the public wish to address council on this item, this is the time to do so, hitting *9 or dialing in and hitting hitting *9 to raise your hand, or hitting the raise hand option within the Zoom application under reactions. So I don't anticipate a large public input on this item, but this is the chance. If you wish to address us on this topic, you may do so. Go ahead, Mr. Herman.
Thank you, Worship. Again, I don't have specific figures other than indicate what's been indicated to me generally. The plant will be more efficient. We would expect those costs to go down. There would be, the engineer would have an estimate of that, but oftentimes until we live it, that's where we look at the comparison. But again, if council would like that information, I can research that and circulate it once I collect that information.
That's enough questions for me, and I'll take up further questions with the Director of Parks, Rec and Culture directly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Zelka. I'm just going to ask, is there anybody, members of the public, who wish to speak? If you can hit *9 if you're dialed in, or raise your hand through the application. That's clicking on the reactions button at the bottom of the screen and selecting raise hand. If anybody wishes to address council or ask any questions before we get to the motion. I just don't see many hands up from council, so I assume we're going to get to a motion here fairly quickly. Ms. Morden, is anybody that on your end indicated they wish to speak to this item?
I'm not seeing anyone, Your Worship. No.
Okay. This is true for all of the items upcoming. I'll call it out at the beginning and ask people to raise their hands, and I'll get to you as we get to that point. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Yeah, just one quick thing to Mr. Herman. I'm not sure whether he'll be able to answer this or we actually need an answer, but I just found it really interesting that the second bid that we received was almost 50% more than the first bid. Why would there be such a disparity in the bids? It's almost $200,000.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Mr. Herman?
Thank you, Your Worship. Certainly, staff noted that. That was one of the reasons why a really thorough analysis of both bids was undertaken to ensure that nothing was missed. It's difficult to speculate on what opponents are thinking when they submit a bid. Sometimes they're somewhat busy and a bid can be submitted, and I'm not saying that's the case here with this high bid, but you will sometimes see bids come in high that the company is busy, but if the municipality is willing to pay this, we'll do the work. We suspect that the low bid also may have something to do with that proponent has not done much work for us here in Oak Bay in the past, although in a previous position I had in Mission, actually Fraser Valley Refrigeration was our go-to refrigeration contractor, but they have been trying to establish a bit of a presence on the island, so it could be that this is they wanted to ensure they got the bid in an effort to do some work for us and try and put their best foot forward for potential future work. So again, speculating, don't really know, but those are some of the things that have gone through our discussions.
Thank you, Mr. Herman.
Thank you. I'm sure we're happy to accommodate that. So I'm prepared to make the motion, Mayor, if it's the right time that we receive the report. And that, would you like it in two separate motions or?
No, it's fine. You can do them together.
So I would move receipt of the report and that the contract to replace the chiller be awarded to Fraser Valley Refrigeration in accordance to their submission.
Thank you very much. Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any other discussion on this? The motion is live on the table. I don't see any, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much, Mr. Herman, for that. We stick with Parks and Recreation, but now with the Manager of Recreation and Culture, Mr. Meikle. There's a report here on permanent locations of donated sculptures. I will hand it over to Mr. Meikle to give a brief introduction.
Great. Thank you, Your Worship. Just checking in. You can hear me all right?
We can hear you fine. And I should just point out, if anybody is watching and wishes to make any comments from the public, this is the time. If you can call in and hit *9 to indicate you wish to speak. I think it's *9. *9 to raise your hand, or you can raise your hand through the application as well. So with that call, I would go back to you, Mr. Meikle.
Thank you, Your Worship. So staff are seeking direction for the permanent installation locations of 2 sculptures, which were donated to the district and accepted as donations by council in the fall of 2020. The first one is called Portal by Heather Passmore, and the second one is Jelly by artist Nathan Smith. At that time, last November, council referred the locations or the installation locations to be determined at a later date. Staff have since investigated further options for these permanent locations. And in the case of Portal, it is currently located on the Esplanade, and this is it's about approximately 200 feet, and I believe there's an error in the report. It says 200 meters. About 200 feet towards the Uplands Park area, or Cattle Point, up the Esplanade, is with the preferred location of the artist and the donor themselves. So that is why that location has been brought forward. And in the case of Jelly, this location in the Estevan Village is recommended by staff. The sculpture itself is being donated by the artist. And this location is recommended by staff given the actual nature of the sculpture, as it's not a particularly interactive or climbable sculpture. So seeking a location which kind of naturally discouraged that level of interactivity was important there. So these locations were brought forward to the Public Arts Advisory Committee in May for discussion, and their subsequent recommendation is brought forward here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Meikle. Again, I'll go to council, then to public, and then we'll get to a motion. Go ahead, Councillor Ney.
Unmute. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Meikle, for the report and explaining this to us. I have no problem with the recommended locations, and thanks for giving us the opportunity to comment. I would just want to make one comment. I walk down at Bowker most mornings, and I did note that the Portal by Heather Passmore it does say it's interactive, and I'm not sure how recently you've been down there, but somebody took the word interactive quite literally and has created a dream catcher on the inside circuit. Now, I don't think we call that vandalism, given that there's an invitation to be interactive, though I'm not quite sure that's what that meant, but it's actually quite a clever piece of artistic maneuvering from my perspective. But anyhow, I'm quite okay with it's just a comment, Mr. Meikle, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ney. Are there any? I don't see any other hands raised in terms of questions at this point. Now, okay, no, sorry, I lost someone there for a second, but they're back on my screen. Ms. Morton, has anybody on your side of things indicated they wish to address council?
I'm not seeing any hands, Your Worship, and I'm not seeing any callers that have joined recently.
Okay, so then I will come back to this table. Is there a motion that we can then discuss?
I'll move, Mr. Mayor, that we receive the report and that both of these recommendations by staff be approved.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Discussion. I'm not seeing any hands up for discussion, so I am ready to call the question. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson. I was just trying to give a little extra time in case there anybody wanted to address. If you can't get to the hand, just you can always wave frantically and try. I'll keep an eye on the screen. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, for that. I'm sorry, I will not be supporting the installation of Portal on the Willows Beach Promenade. So while if you could sever the motion, I will vote them as separate items. Thank you.
I'm happy to do so, Councillor Patterson. So I'll treat them as three separate motions. No problem there at all. Councillor Nate, did you wish to add anything? Your hand is up officially here.
Yeah, sorry, no, but should I, is that a friendly amendment or should I just do that? Or are you
I'll
gonna-
just separate. I'll call the question
Facilitate that.
separately.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll call the question separately. Any other discussion? Not seeing any, so I will call the questions independently. So the motion to receive first. It's moved and seconded. Thank you. And those are any discussion on that motion? All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you. Then we have the motion for the sculpture portal on the Esplanade. Councillor Patterson, did you want to address that any further? Or are you satisfied with the comments you've made so far?
I just, Mayor Murdoch, if I might say that this follows pretty much my consistency in opposing the installation of particularly donated art rather than art that has been selected by the community as installations along the waterfront. And particularly on the sidewalk area, because our sidewalk on the promenade at this point in time certainly is not generous to the pedestrian traffic. It's fairly narrow, and but I just the installation of sculptures, particularly when they are donated and they have not been selected by any kind of a community process other than that. And on the shoreline, I just generally have am not in agreement with the placement of them there. So this is consistent with all the other times.
It is, and I appreciate you saying it. I always just like if people are voting in opposition to give the chance to explain why, rather than just have it there. In this case, I think we understood, but just for the public's benefit as well. So thank you. Any other discussion on this item? I'm not seeing any. All those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Patterson in opposition. That carries. And then the last item, the related to the donation of and location of the item jelly. So I get a mover and seconder for that. Moved and seconded. I didn't see a seconder hand go up. If I could just get, thank you. Just want to make sure we do this right. Any other discussion on this item? Not seeing any. I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That passes. Thank you so much. Moving on to number 8.3. Mr. Meikle, you're back on again. This is related to the allocation of public art funds for 2021.
Thank you, Your Worship. So staff are seeking direction here as to the preferred allocation of the annual public art fund contribution of $20,000. And further, that council provide direction for the allocation of 1% of the municipal hall renovation project amounting to $7,000 to be combined with that public art fund. We'll go back to the adoption of the public art policy in 2017. And since that initiation, council has allocated $20,000 to the public art fund annually to be used towards the purchase and or commission of public art for the district. Since its inception, this annual allocation has been generally put towards the purchase of a sculpture that has been part of or is generally the top public vote recipient of the annual Arts Alive program. Second piece of the public art policy is the component allocating 1% of any major municipal building renovation or construction project to the purchase or commission of a public art piece. With the renovations of Municipal Hall this year provided kind of a unique opportunity for council to consider the allocation of this annual contribution to the public art fund of $20,000 in conjunction with or in combination with the 1% of the renovation project or $7,000 corresponding there. So this, as mentioned, does present a unique opportunity that has not actually presented itself to the best of my knowledge since the inception of the public art policy, which is why this report is coming before council now. And as mentioned, staff are seeking council direction here in terms of the allocation of the public art funds and the opportunity to combine this with the allocation from the Municipal Hall renovation project.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to just make the same call to the public. If anybody wishes to address council on this, you're more than welcome to do so. You can call into the 1-855 number that's at the top of the agenda, or you can join us through Zoom as well and use the raise hand option. But for now, we're sticking with the council members that are in the room to ask questions. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, Mayor Murdoch. I thank you for bringing this report forward, Mr. Meikle. I'm so thrilled that we get to kind of cash in on the line that we put in the public arts policy about the renovation amount, 1% renovation amount of any municipal hall renovation project. That's really great. I also think that the $20,000 that we normally would allocate to a sculpture from the Arts Alive program would be well served to do something instead around our newly renovated municipal hall. I know that when we originally talked about the renovation at Municipal Hall, I mentioned that for me, what I would have liked to have seen in the actual hall, the unit around a councillor dais, was some sort of Indigenous artwork in the panels that are facing the public. And so I would be really happy to see the money, the $27,000, be used for something like that. And I'd be very interested to hear what my fellow councillors would have to say about where they think the money should be used.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. And I think you raised the point that we're sort of here to give some direction. That would be both, if yes, in principle, yes, the amount of money, and then if there's any specific directions that council wishes to give, probably to the Arts Advisory Committee to kind of manage it going forward. So those are all very important key pieces. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and just want to take the opportunity to agree wholeheartedly with Councillor Braithwaite. I concur that the funds should be, in my opinion, the funds should be combined, the 20,000 with the extra reserve from the renovation project, and be used specifically to commission an artwork from the Lekwungen speaking peoples, and to have their presence and their art featured prominently in the municipal hall as part of the renovation. And I think this is as was mentioned, a rare opportunity, kind of an unequaled opportunity to have the resources to do that. And as the renovated municipal hall opens, to have that be one of the centerpieces of that. So I'm very much in favor of combining those funds and using it specifically for an artwork by an Indigenous artist. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Appleton. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson, and then Green.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the comments of Councillors Braithwaite and Appleton, and I think the suggestion is good. I would, though, however, like to have a better understanding of the where the budget is going to end up, the Q2 reporting, really. And I would also just wonder, and would like to hear comments from the council. We do not, at this point in time, have an arts laureate in place. And I think my preference would be if there is an estimate of being able to move that process forward in good order. And I know that's difficult because you have to secure the individual who will be interested in the position. But I think that it would be a great opportunity to have an arts laureate start with the committee and take a leadership role on this, and any call for invitations, particularly if it's with First Nations community, for an artistic piece to grace the municipal hall. And I just think that it would maybe be beneficial to have that in place prior to proceeding forward with any actual undertaking to solicit the art. Thank you. I'm not hearing you, Mayor.
Apologies. I thought I unmuted myself. Councillor Green, go ahead, and then Councillor Braithwaite again.
Thank you very much, and I do agree with the previous councillors that a piece of Indigenous artwork would be very fitting. I agree to an extent with the Arts Laureate comments of Councillor Patterson, and thank you for that. I'm just thinking though that we should take perhaps our guidance from Songhees at this stage and have them recommend to us an artist and then perhaps work with that artist on a piece. I just think that would be a better approach perhaps. And secondly, just a small, maybe something that I think is important that is perhaps small, but not really small. And that is when we do reopen the hall, it would be wonderful to extend an invitation to Chief Ron Sam and his council to attend. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I am back to Councillor Braithwaite here.
Thank you, Mayor. I just on some of Councillor Patterson's comments in regards to including the Arts Laureate. I think that in actual fact, now that we have a public arts committee, that committee is taking more of a leadership role in regards to what you're speaking of, and perhaps Mr. Meikle can speak to this as well. I think that the mandate of the Arts Laureate is a little bit different now, and so for me personally, I would like to see the Public Arts Committee look at something like this rather than wait for the Arts Laureate. But perhaps Mr. Meikle, you might have something to add that I'm missing on that.
Sure. Before I go to Mr. Meikle, I think it's important here today to give the governance piece of approval of that approach to funding. And I think, I think it's helpful to have this discussion, but we probably do want to refer it either to the Public Art Advisory Committee, or if it's the desire of this body to wait until we have an established Arts Laureate, then that's another possibility as well. But I don't think we're going to resolve the issue here today. It's more just, are we okay with the funding model, and would we like to refer it to the Public Art Advisory Committee, perhaps even for a recommended process attached to this? If we give some, with as much constraint of that direction as possible, will make their lives a lot easier. I had Councillor Green. Are you completed? Oh, you had a question for Mr. Meikle. Go ahead, Mr. Meikle.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. In the past, it has been the Public Arts Advisory Committee that has been primarily responsible for a call for artists, for example, or a call for artwork, and for the jurying process. The Arts Laureate was part of that committee and part of that group that would go through the jurying process, but it certainly was not the sole responsibility of the Arts Laureate. It was a responsibility of the collective Public Arts Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Meikle. So I'm going to just turn to Ms. Morden. Has anybody from the public indicated they wish to address council on this item at this time?
Not seeing anyone, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you very much. So back to this table, I just seek some direction from council. What I heard was some general agreement about spending some money and using it for First Nations artist. The exact process that would to be undertaken probably to be determined. So if that's the general direction, maybe also some guidance to refer to the Public Arts Advisory Committee, and perhaps with some conditions attached, so that we could probably just pass on through Mr. Meikle at the liaison the conversation that's happened here as well. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I'm hearing from your comments there that I would prefer, I see the rationale for referring to the Public Art Advisory Committee, but I do feel that there is, in a sense, a bit of a governance decision to seek specifically an Indigenous artist to complete the artwork. That is, I'm hearing that that's above board, that I'm not contravening anything by asking for that specification. I do value, obviously, the contribution of the Public Arts Advisory Committee, but I do think that in the sense of from a council to council perspective, and from a reconciliation with Indigenous peoples perspective, for us to actively seek their contribution to Municipal Hall, I think is significant. So.
Great. Is there a motion from anybody? You have the floor right now. You can take it.
Thank you, Worship. I'll try to get this right then. I guess I would say that I would select option 1. So I would move that council direct staff to combine the public art funds, $20,000 with 1% of the municipal hall renovation project, $7,000, and allocate these total funds towards the commission of artwork for municipal hall, and that the district allocate these funds towards the commission of an artwork by an Indigenous artist from the Lekwungen peoples in whose traditional territories the district is located, and that the matter be referred to the Public Arts Advisory Committee for input.
Second.
Great. I think that was extremely clear, Councillor Appleton. Thank you for that. Very helpful. Any discussion on that motion as it's sitting? I'll deal with the motion to receive after we've done with the meat of the matter. I think it's anything you want to add, Councillor Appleton, before I go to Councillor Zelka?
No, well, I would just very briefly, Your Worship, I appreciate Council's support on this, and I do really feel that the outcome, I am very excited about the potential outcome of having such an artwork, and I do very much appreciate staff presenting the option at this time. It's an excellent opportunity to advance reconciliation with Indigenous peoples in our area. So thank you for that.
Great, thank you very much, Councillor Appleton. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to ask for clarification. Does the motion basically suggest that we would be asking the Public Arts Committee to be working with either an artist from the Songhees Nation or the Esquimalt Nation, and/or? Just wanted to clarify that it'd be one or the other. It's not specifically one of the two.
The language is actually the area of the Lekwungen speaking people in which lands we occupy, so it encompasses both. It was actually excellently worded. I was ready to correct if that was just one or the other, but that was perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? I'm not seeing any, so I think, go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just for clarification then, the role of the Public Arts Committee in this, because I do see this as an opportunity for opening the dialogue between the district's art community and certainly the Arts Committee and the Lekwungen speaking people and that artistic community. And, you know, I did hear that guidance would be, we would seek guidance on that from First Nations, but it's a little vague to me on how that process will be defined and whether it will be up to our Public Arts Committee, in fact, to define that process, or if guidance will be sought from the First Nations communities on how the process will be put forward as a public process where artists will in fact be putting forward the ideas for the piece of art. So that because it is a little different from our typical arts committee's role in some of our arts process. So I just like some clarity around how we see that specifically being achieved, the communication piece.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I'm not sure we can entirely answer that question right now. I'll go to Mr. Meikle. I can certainly see there being this referring to that body and staff for some advice on that process and for that to come back. Because any commission process has a slightly different process than a call for existing artwork. So, Mr. Meikle.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Patterson. You're correct in that there's some uncertainty in how the process would go. I think first discussion may be discovering, if you like, how that process may work best for the nations and what may work best in terms of availability of artists, and all of those kinds of questions come into play here. I think the Public Arts Advisory Committee can certainly provide some advice as to their experiences here and processes they've seen work elsewhere or have been part of themselves. that may give us some guidance on how to move forward. But I think an initial discussion, and whether that's a council to council kind of discussion, is certainly for your purview here. But I think some understanding of a process from the First Nations perspective would be important.
Thank you, Mr. Meikle.
If I might then, Mayor, just to continue for clarification then, my understanding of what I've heard is that the Public Arts Committee will discuss this and perhaps come forward with a recommendation, but council will be advised on the steps going forward and generally who will be the spokesperson and how it will be undertaken to move to the next step. Is that what I'm hearing, and is that the way it's going to be?
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Within the bounds of what we don't know right now, Mr. Meikle, is that sort of your understanding that that'll go to the Public Art Advisory Committee for advice and then back to this table for additional guidance?
Thank you, Your Worship. That would be my understanding, and that would be my recommendation moving forward. Yes.
Okay, and just for clarification on that point of Councillor Patterson's, if this motion passes and it goes forward, is it right to assume that when that goes to the Public Art Advisory Committee, there'll be a staff report that kind of encapsulates some of the options and a little bit of background, so they have some structure to that discussion a bit more than we have here tonight, which is more of a high-level governance piece. Is that a fair assumption, Mr. Meikle?
Yes, Your Worship. Thank you. That is a fair assumption.
Okay, so that will help, I think, structure that discussion a bit.
Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Ney.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just picking up, and I don't want to go down another rabbit hole, but I really appreciate the direction this is going, generally speaking, but I really take seriously Councillor Patterson's comments, because we are in a process with our First Nations neighbors here, and we don't have processes in place as we work towards the reconciliation process. And it's been a little bit uneven, I suppose. And I think, I think what's coming to mind for me that, there was a motion back in March or something about us moving this to the APC. And I really think that for me, this is prompting is the need for this council to sort of center this in a way where we can get some agreement and some planning underway about how we as a council intend to engage and move forward on initiatives like this, who makes the contact, how that's undertaken, how our committees are, committee members who are involved in these things are provided with culturally sensitive training, etc., so that we're all on the same page, moving in the same direction, and that this council has confidence about the kinds of processes that are going to be engaged as we continue this process down the road.
Thank you, Councillor Ney.
So I guess what I'm saying, Mr. Mayor, to you, I'd like to just, as I'm speaking to this not slip away again, because we brought it up, and I'd like to ask your advice, Mr. Mayor, how we can find a way to get this as an agenda item to discuss it, so that there is a placeholder. In my view, this would be at the APC, and I'm probably going off track here, Mr. Mayor, but if you could just advise me how we could bring this back to the council table to have this discussion, so that we don't have to sort of piecemeal this and sort of try and figure it out every time an issue comes up like this, and that we have some confidence in pathways for engaging that we've all agreed upon.
Yeah, and I have limited answers at the moment for you, but I would say we've already agreed that we're putting First Nations relationship building as a strategic priority. It's bookmarked in there. And I think that might be the place in terms of building some larger, like adding funding or adding some additional structure to those pieces. For now, I'm having pretty regular conversations with some of the local First Nations leadership. And, as long as we're going with honestly asking them to give their guidance on an appropriate approach, they're fairly happy with that going forward. I'm not saying we don't need some additional work on that piece, but it should not preclude us from taking these opportunities, I think, to seek these small ways of reaching out and building relationships in small ways. I don't see any other hands up at this point. Councillor Ney, anything else you wish to add?
Well, I guess I'm just saying, I think we should be a little bit more rigorous and deliberate about how we do this around bringing all of us up to another level of cultural sensitivity rather than just I feel like we're kind of winging it here, and I'd like to see us be a little bit more deliberate and calculated about how we ramp up our cultural sensitivity and awareness as we engage in this process.
Very good. Thank you, Councillor Ney. Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I would have to agree with Councillor Ney. I think this, that's why I raised it initially, was that I think we need a process by which we can seek guidance and leadership on the issue of placing a significant art piece in our municipal hall. I think we're in very early stages of building that relationship, but I think this does require more formality. And I would agree that we need to start to establish those connections so that we're consistent, and also so that we are completely aware and sensitive to their needs rather than just our own needs. So I appreciate that. I would appreciate that consideration going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to keep this, we have a motion on the floor right now. So I think I'm hearing discussions here that's either off topic or is in opposition to the motion that's on the floor. So I'm just want to make sure I'm clear in terms of where people are at, if they'd like to make amendments to the motion, or if they would like to speak in opposition to it, we can maybe have that. But I just, if it sounds like in general, people are supportive of the direction forward, but would like some additional clarity on process as we're moving on. So I just want to make sure if there's anything there that says that this motion is not worded the way that people are comfortable with, then we should address it to the motion on the floor here. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
I support the motion, absolutely. In principle, I do. And I think I think these additional comments are what I would call footnotes to the process. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion here? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. So as having made the motion, I just want to acknowledge the comments by my colleagues and specifically Councillor Ney. I definitely don't disagree in any way, shape, or form, and I value the comments about having a larger process in place. I guess, from my opinion, in my view, and I understand the cautions about being haphazard, and I really do. I guess, in my view, at this juncture, the two are not mutually exclusive. That this process may allow us to make some connections and allow for some learning and development for our Public Arts Advisory Committee members to help to suss out and determine what the best course of action is by asking our colleagues and by asking our Indigenous neighbors. I guess I see it in that positive sense that there are some really important and some really interesting learnings that could derive from this process, but not to take the place of a larger strategic process for reconciliation for the district, which I totally agree with. Thank you.
Thanks to Councillor Appleton. Just as we've been going through our first time speakers, I'm just going to comment. No objection here either. I think the points made are excellent. I also want to keep us on track a little bit on the motion that's in front of us as well. So allow some leeway here, but I don't want to get too far off the track of trying to address the entirety of managing First Nations relations, which is a significantly larger issue than we're having in front of us and have prepared for tonight's meeting. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson, then Zelka.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and I appreciate those comments. I am fully supportive of the allocation of the funding, so that I have no problem. I also have some comfort that it's going to be coming back to council. I don't know the Public Arts Committee members well. I don't know what their the background is, and so but I do think that how the process goes forward is independent from the motion on the allocation of the funding. I just, I don't like to move forward handing it off to a committee to give some guidance back to council when in fact, I guess I'm thinking that perhaps the guidance needs to come from council as to how the communication strategy will work with First Nations. But if I'm totally supportive of it, and if any of the recommendations that the committee can make that will, add to the discussion and shed some light on some good strategy to move forward, then then I think that will be achieving what we want. But I'm totally supportive of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm also speaking in support of the motion. Also coming from a place of, I guess I have to refer to it as cultural humility. I was at an event a couple of years ago here in Oak Bay having to do with one of the heritage sites that had a potential midden on it. And attending the meeting about the midden were representatives from Sartlip, Sakem, and Sayout First Nations, also known as the Saanich Leadership Council. Saanich, of course, is named after them. And I was pleased to discover that part of their traditional territory extends partially into Oak Bay. So I don't know whether they are Lekwungen speaking, but I do look forward to learning more about those who lived here before the settlers arrived. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion live on the floor. I don't see any other hands up on the motion. So I'm ready to call the question. All those in favor? And any opposed? Since everybody's hands up in favor, I'm guessing nobody's opposed. We'll move to this. Thank you very much for all of the comments there, and those will help guide the Public Art Advisory Committee on that as well, and perhaps some larger discussion pieces in terms of structures going forward. We have up next on 8.4. These are beginning of a series of Committee of the Whole recommendations. So basically, we are trying to move forward with the recommendations as we gave to ourselves, sitting as Committee of the Whole. And I apologize, I have lost my screen here. I'm just going to bring it back up for these items. So item number first up, 8.4, is the Carnarvon Park tennis courts, and you see the recommendation there made by us that it be recommended to council that 4 remaining tennis courts located at Carnarvon Park be resurfaced in late August, early September for $88,000. That's the recommendation here. This body is the determining factor. So with that, it's at this table. Are there any questions that council has of staff on this item? Don't see any. So Ms. Morgan, I'll invite the public. Anybody who wishes to address council on this, you can do so. You can hit, whether we have this covered at the Committee of the Whole, you can do so by dialing into the number and hitting *9 to raise your hand. But at this point, I'll stick with the council. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
I was just going to be prepared to make the recommendation as per the 8.4 on the agenda.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded. Thank you. Councillor Braithwaite, anything you wish to add to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I think that when I've read the information about the tennis courts, and I really thought about this a lot because I've had a few people ask me about the Carnarvon master plan, and that will not be done for about 5 to 6 years. So how I'm looking at the resurfacing of the tennis courts is that that will increase residents to be able to go, and it'll increase the number of tennis courts that we have that are usable. The tennis courts right now, even though they're being used a little bit at Carnarvon, are not really safe. And for me, it's all about the health and safety. And I think that if we left these tennis courts not being resurfaced for the next 4 to 5 years, it would become a high risk it would become really risky for people to go and play there, because even right now, there's a lot of divots and damage to the courts. So for me, it becomes a safety issue. And I think that Mayor Haynes also talked about mental wellness and being in parks and being outdoors. And I think that has something to do with it as well. There is a potential to gain a little bit of money back, not a lot, from the rentals, but it does kind of keep that area active. And I think in that respect, instead of having to close the tennis courts down and not allow anybody in that area, it might become very derelict. And so for me, it's worth the money that we would be spending to redo the courts and have our residents be able to have an active lifestyle on those courts for the next 5 to 6 years before we redo the Carnarvon Park.
Thank you, Councilor Braithwaite. And I should point out to people watching, there was a fairly lengthy discussion of this topic at the committee of the whole. So we're not here to start the whole thing over again, but it is the opportunity for us to make a decision, and this is the chance for us to consider the point. So go ahead, Councilor Zelka, then Appleton.
Thank you, Chair. I'm in full agreement with Councillor Braithwaite's comments and speaking in support of the motion. The only question I might have is with respect to the almost $90,000 coming from Capital Works Reserve. I just want to confirm through staff that this doesn't exhaust that reserve. And with respect to the item earlier on in the agenda, potential $90,000 we might be using for the Kings Road Park contribution to save that the park that's in Saanich, to help save that park. I just wanted to ask, would the funds from over there be coming from the Capital Works Reserve, and does this funding in any way negatively impact potential funding over there?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I'm not sure if we have anybody on staff who can answer the options that'll be coming in the report back to council as to where the money comes from. In terms of that piece, but Ms. Varela, I'll leave it to you if there's anybody available that can address those questions.
Director Payne is online, Your Worship.
Oh, he is. Great, thank you, Mr. Payne. If you wouldn't mind, can you just, as best you can, address the potential sources of the potential contribution to the Saanich Park?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Is my volume good with council?
It is. We can hear you fine. Thank you.
Cool. And thank you through you to council. A good question. The potential funding source for a contribution to the Saanich for Kings Road would not come from a Capital Works Reserve, specifically because from our perspective, it's not the purchase of capital. It would be a contribution to Saanich. That contribution would be used for the purchase of capital on the Saanich end, but our Capital Works Reserve must be used for the purchase of our capital. So it doesn't conflict with the potential funding source here that's being proposed by staff. The Capital Works Reserve is not forecasted to be exceeded this year. We set a budget for how much we can use from that reserve for various projects this year. And based on forecasts that we've prepared for Q2, we don't believe we'll exceed those budget limits this year.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm just I just a little more clarification. So you're suggesting that if it's just a contribution to Saanich and Saanich owns the property, then the Capital Works Reserve is not appropriate. Is that true?
Mr. Payne?
Yes, Your Worship. The Capital Works Reserve has to be used for the purchase of our own capital, and since we have no ownership interest in that park after it's purchased, it can't be used for that from our fund.
So the fund we would draw from then would be like an operating fund, most likely of some sort?
Mr. Payne, I know this will be coming to us in a report in future, but as best you can answer that question with the options.
Yes, through Your Worship. I anticipate there'll be 3 options. One would be from our operating reserve, the accumulated surplus reserve, so unspent budget funds from previous years, or within the current year budget, if we have some forecasted surplus, we could allocate over there, or there is the option of taxation, but that most likely won't be recommended.
Thank you. If I ask one more question, if possible. I'm reminded of the, I guess, what is it, the Royal and McPherson Theatre, when that was purchased by Oak Bay, or partially purchased. That appeared to be a capital purchase at the time, since those buildings were needed to be essentially saved from the wrecking ball. If we got into an agreement with Saanich and Victoria, and we actually owned a piece of that land, would that turn that into a capital works and make it available for this reserve?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Payne, I'm not sure if you're able to answer that question or not, but I'll give you the opportunity.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Most likely, yes, Councillor Zelka. If the district was on title, or then yes, that would be a capital.
Okay.
It would also open up the potential to use other reserves we have, other capital reserves that we have.
Excellent, thank you. That's enough information, and I appreciate your willingness to step out on that gangplank. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. With respect to the motion on the floor, I'm in opposition. I reiterate the opposition from the Committee of the Whole meeting for two reasons. Both that there have been community concerns raised about the condition of various facilities at Carnarvon, and so I don't debate for a moment that there's the need for resurfacing of the tennis courts. But I feel that we could have engaged in a larger process to talk about what people would want for priority updates, and also from the perspective of it does provide an amenity for use while the Carnarvon Master Plan is being implemented or being developed, but it does in a way limit our ability to expedite the Carnarvon Master Plan, in the sense that if the Carnarvon Master Plan, if it was Council's direction to expedite the Carnarvon Master Plan, we would be have some fairly new infrastructure in that park that we would then have to plan around. It would limit, we would want to get maximum usage out of those things and not scrap tennis courts that have been recently resurfaced. So I feel it somewhat limits our options. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor. I also will speak in opposition to this, somewhat echoing Councillor Appleton's comments, but also as Councillor Braithwaite spoke to this as a safety issue. Well, the pickleball courts and now the tennis courts are being resurfaced. That's $160,000. If there were safety issues in any of our facilities, I would hope that it would be brought to Council's attention expeditiously, and certainly at the time that we do budgets. There is no guarantee that if this is a safety issue, that there may not be other issues to Carnarvon Park. And I think that there are a number of issues with Carnarvon Park that have been raised by residents. I echo Councillor Appleton's comments about rather than deferring Carnarvon Park, if the conditions are deemed to be unsafe or not utilized by residents of our community because of the condition of the park, then what I would like to see is, rather than doing small portions like this, basically in response to lobbying by residents who are understandably fighting to get work done so that they can use them. But then I think it's up to Council to revisit the plans for Carnarvon Park and find a way to expedite it so that we are not, in fact, just responding to residents that come forward and say we can't use this portion of the park because, you know, it is not it's not an appropriate way to manage it. So I can't support certainly going forward with this when I don't have a full understanding of all of the issues at Carnarvon Park, where the priorities lay, and what all options are available to council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Go ahead, Councillor Nay.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I know we're here to make this decision. We've obviously already done this, but in light of the discussion, I just have 3 questions to staff. So first of all, what prompted this issue to come up at committee? I don't recall. Was it the committee suggesting that there were safety issues or staff?
I might be able to answer that, maybe Ms. Varela. And that is basically that the in the discussion around the pickleball courts being re-centered, the condition of the tennis courts, existing tennis courts, which had not been touched for quite some time, was raised. And in the context of we had sort of a one-time capital or monetary return from the CRD of $300,000 that was going into capital reserves. We looked at that was how it raised up, was just, okay, we've got this, those tennis courts are in bad shape. Is this something we should be looking at? And that's and so staff brought back, if you want to do it, here's the cost. And that was the source of the discussion. There's no.
Okay, that's fine. And the other to staff through you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Herman, whoever's there now, I'm not quite sure. Is it Mr. Meikle there? Do these tennis courts in their current condition put the district at risk?
I'm not sure I'm going to, that's a dangerous question to ask in the public forum.
The question really has to do with, if the courts are in such disrepair, it's a risk management question, Mr. Mayor. So I have no basis on which to determine that.
Mr. Meikle, perhaps you can address that question. Certainly you can address the question of how much use they're getting in their current condition.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Oh,
I'll
sorry,
I'll let Ray speak to this. Sorry, I was just going to say, I'll let Director Herman speak.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Mr. Meikle. Welcome back, Mr. Herman.
Thank you, Your Worship, and sorry for cutting off Mr. Meikle. I wasn't sure if he was still there. I would suggest that we need to think of safety of any of the facilities more as a range or a continuum as opposed to on or off. Is it safe or is it not safe? Clearly, as part of our work, if we felt that any particular piece of equipment or any facility was down that continuum to the point where it was completely unsafe and shouldn't be used, we would take it out of service. Or we would be, or in addition to that, be asking council to consider money to refurbish. So those courts, I wouldn't say are in that kind of condition, but the council wants to spend this money. Will they be safer? Yes, but it's not uncommon. Tennis courts crack, and the courts at Henderson crack, the courts at Windsor crack. That's a common thing that happens, and then you monitor those cracks. There are little skinny cracks and there are wider cracks, and so rather than have to spend the money and resurface all of our courts every year or two, every time a crack shows up, we try to monitor and say, okay, and we're on sort of a rotating basis in a lot of cases, certainly between Henderson and Windsor, so that they don't come up all at the same time. Carnarvon now is coming into the mix, but I wouldn't say that those courts right now are unsafe to the point where they need to be closed or considered to be closed. That being said, They're certainly not in as nice a shape as the other courts, outdoor courts in the community. And I suppose you could argue that they're, because they've got more cracks in them, they could be perceived as not as safe. But I think right now, from a staff perspective, I don't feel that they're unsafe to the point that they would need to be closed.
Okay, thank you. I have one more question in the context of comments made by my council colleagues. I recall we were presented with a version of the master plan. I don't know, Mr. Herman, it was 3, maybe 4 years ago. You probably would know the specific date, but why has this been put out another 5 years, if I've understood? So that would be like 8, 9 years since we had the plan presented to the council first. I might be wrong on the date, Mr. Herman, I'm not sure, but it seemed like quite a while ago. So the question through you, Mayor, is why has this been delayed for another? Why have we put this off? I've lost track of that.
Thank you. I think I would word that a little differently than why has it been delayed, but just perhaps an update on the timetable. I believe we're doing the building process first and then other aspects following. But Mr. Herman, perhaps you can give us an update on the timelines and expectations and things that have shifted over time.
Sure, thank you, Your Worship. We're following the recommended implementation plan that was encompassed within the master plan. There was a whole section on implementation, and it was phased and prioritized. And of course, that plan was approved by council. So, those are our marching orders to follow what's in there. What's happened? The pandemic happened. That's put us behind by 2 years. So we were ready to bring forward the first item in the implementation plan in 2020. That's now been pushed out to 2022. And that is for some additional consultation and design of the building itself. That was determined to be the first priority. The building, as much as there's other infrastructure that's in bad shape, that building is not in good shape. And it lays the groundwork for things like that building houses a lot of the operating equipment that operates the spray park. So before you can look at enhancing the spray park, that building needs to be done. So there were reasons why the building was selected first. So that is expected to be dealt with in 2022. So we've lost 2 years, that's correct. Then I'm sorry, I'm going by memory here, so forgive me if I don't get it right, but that's to be done in 2022. Then I believe 2023, we're right now in our work plan as far as large projects go, is the big consultation piece around off-leash issues. And then 2024 is the Parks, Recreation, and Culture Master Plan. 2025, as the financial plan currently exists, would see both the construction of the building take place, but also then the design to be ready to tender the build out of all the remaining aspects of the park. So the spray park, the pickleball courts, the tennis courts, what have you, all those other items outside of the building. So if you consider that that design work would be done in 2025, we would expect that 2026 or 2027 at the latest, that build out would take place. So that's where the timeline comes from.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ney. Any other discussion on this item? I'll just add my comment in support. At the end of the day, I look at all of our parks as needing to be maintained to a certain level, and these tennis courts are not being maintained at that level and haven't been for a number of years, as they've, we've had other capital priorities, and we've had, this master plan for change coming, and all very legitimate. I look at it though that we need to make sure that we're maximizing our current existing already built infrastructure to make sure it's available for people. And if you go by there, you see the well used, the better shaped courts you can use sometimes, and the worst case ones almost never. They just, people choose other places. And I think if we want to see those being used, we have to just do our basics, which is maintaining to a reasonable level those courts so that people are comfortable using them. And so to my mind, this is just really, we have this little pocket of money that came to us, and I think this is a reasonable way to use it, is to bring that court back to the level that it should be maintained at, you know, and the others are in the community regularly. And we'll, it's not a large amount of money at the end, and still gives us the opportunity for them to operate while we're doing the building and the other tendering processes over the next few years. So I'm very comfortable with the motion as it's sitting here in front of us. Any other discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Ney.
Just quickly, Mr. I'm going to vote in favor of this. And I just, you know, bottom line, having listened to everything and how far out we are to actually implementing the master plan, I really think that, particularly at this time, since what we've gone through over the last year and a half, that investing in our recreation infrastructure really is investing in our community health. And that's a real priority right now. So.
Thank you, Councillor Ney. I don't see any other discussion, so the motion is on the floor to recommend that that money be spent. I'm just getting a text here to make sure it's nothing crazy that I have to. Oh, I'm being told I can't hear me very well. Is that a little bit better? If I, okay, there we go. I'll do that. So with that, I will call the question then. Not seeing any other hands. All those in favor? And those opposed? I have Councillor Appleton and Councillor Patterson opposed. That motion carries. Thank you very much for that discussion, everyone. We are under item number 8.5. We are now welcoming Mr. Horan, our Director of Engineering and Public Works, to our meeting, talking about the process for public space liquor and food service. Welcome, Mr. Horan. I appreciate the report that you've provided to give us some background, and welcome to our meeting.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Do you want me to do just a quick rundown of the contents of the report to kick off the discussion?
I think that's always helpful for especially members of the public who might not have read the reports in detail. And again, if anybody members of the public wish to address council on this issue, please call in now and hit *9 to raise your hand. Or if you're in the Zoom meeting, hit the raise hand option under reactions at the bottom of the screen. So go ahead, Mr. Horan.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So soon after the pandemic restrictions in the late spring, early summer of 2020 started to relax, part of the district's response was to take a quick means where possible to help support local businesses in bouncing back and adapting through the various restrictions and challenges through the summer. So part of that was taking advantage of the province's temporary rules with respect to liquor and food service area authorizations. And this allowed Oak Bay to come up with a way to allow small businesses to use public space for those temporary service area expansions, things like patios and food service in either the public right of way or parking spaces and so on. So this quick and agile way to regulate and permit a scheme using the street occupancy permit, waiving fees, putting quick design guidelines in place allowed us to do that. The original deadline was through October 31st, 2020. And when the province and then council extended, this was for an additional year into 2021 here at the end of October. So now the province has signaled that they're moving into making these service area expansions available in terms of more permanent applications and allowing the municipalities to put in place a more permanent mechanism to regulate such requests. So staff is bringing forward this report to update the council and the community on this these changes from the province and seeking some direction. First, to extend the current guidelines until June 1st, 2022, which is the end of the temporary service area authorizations that the province has allowed, and also to direct staff to bring back some appropriate materials to discuss the implications of more permanent use of public space for liquor and food services in the district going forward. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I'm trying to manage some background noises here, so I keep putting on my mute button. My apologies. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you so much, Mr. Horan, for bringing this this report forward. I think out of everything that happened over COVID, this is probably one of the most positive things to come out of the things that we had to take care of, which is something that I've heard from the community a lot, is allowing these restaurants and coffee shops, et cetera, to have temporary sidewalk access to their establishments. I do have a question in regards to how much staff time do you think it might take to come up with the guidelines and standards that we would have to follow for our municipality? And perhaps a second part of that question would be, would it be something that we could perhaps copy from other municipalities, like, for example, the city of Victoria, who I know is looking to go forward with something like this as well to make these structures more permanent?
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Mr. Horan.
Yes, thank you for the question. Through you, Chair, I'll start with an answer as best I can. And I think because in the end, the lead department on this file will likely be building and planning. So I'll potentially give some opportunity for Mr. Anderson to weigh in at the end if I don't hit the pitch properly. I think the real question is, part of the reason why we're making the recommendation that we need to bring it forward with briefing materials for strategic priorities and financial planning process later in this year is because there are a lot of, there is a big variance between the level of effort that could be required. So for example, there could be a scheme put in place that the community appreciates and that the council supports that requires very little public engagement, for example. And then that might be the option that this community would want to follow. But if there's a bunch of engagement that needs to happen in terms of public interaction, feedback, correspondence, taking that information in and deciding to make changes on what the rules might be, then that will add time and level of effort for staff. So there are a lot of examples of guidelines in terms of permitting process and designs of what's available, but the actual decision-making at the governance level and taking that information from the community could be significant in terms of level of effort. So we do need to provide some of those options for analysis and then give it to you as the council to make a decision about impact in terms of resources and current commitments in the strategic priorities list.
Thank you very much, Mr. Horan. And Mr. Anderson has indicated he would like to continue your comments. So go ahead, Mr. Anderson. Mr. Anderson, for the public, is our Director of Building and Planning. Welcome, Mr. Anderson.
Thank you, Worship. And Mr. Horan did mention that if we're developing a new permit system and a process that speaks to how we use our public spaces, yes, there'd be a significant component of it will be public engagement. I just wanted to note that for us, we don't have a patio permit process in place. We use the street occupancy permit as a temporary measure. So for us, we would be developing a new program. And yes, we can crib from other communities, but we would still need to put that together, work on guidelines, work on standards with engineering in terms of use of public space. So it would be certainly a white work plan item, and we would likely have to look at trying to make that happen within the context of the projects we've got on the go. So in part, that's why it's before you tonight, is there are implications for us trying to get something in place so that we can have you consider potential permanent patio improvement applications in the not too distant future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I have Councillor Green. Then
Sorry,
go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. And so just to follow up on that, I think from reading the reports, what I understood, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that if a restaurant chooses to continue on, assuming that Oak Bay goes ahead with allowing this to go on till June 1st, 2022. And if a restaurant chooses to go on beyond that, do they not have to have an application in 10 months prior to June 1st, 2022? Did I read that incorrectly?
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Mr. Horan?
I will do my best to answer this one through you, Chair. I think the province was signaling that making permanent applications will take some time. So that's where the 10-month lead time comes in, probably for, I'm assuming for businesses that haven't started the process. I think for those who currently have a temporary expansion of service area, they're further along in the game. And the reason why the June 1st, 2022 timeline was picked was to allow, from the province's perspective, was to try to facilitate that transition from these temporary service areas to more permanent ones, so the businesses that already have that can apply now, and then there's time to make that from the province's perspective to assess and make decisions. From the municipality's perspective, that isn't a lot of time for us to make some decisions and come up with a regulatory scheme to allow this to happen, if that's the council's desire. So that's why we responded quickly to try to give this information to you and to seek some direction on a way forward.
And lastly, if I may, Mayor,
Go ahead.
then when a restaurant or a business wants to make application, they're making application to the municipality, not the province, because the province has already said to the municipalities, if you choose to move forward with something like this, it's within your purview to then regulate, etc., to the restaurants within your municipality to do so. Is that correct?
I'm going to go to Mr. Anderson, I think, on that one. He has his hand up to answer. Go ahead, Mr. Anderson.
Thank you, Worship. No, in fact, businesses do need to make application to the province for that permanent authorization. Indeed, they also need to make application to local government for our approvals. We still have the jurisdiction over use of our public spaces. So there's basically, you're right, it's an expedited process with the province, but they do need to make application, and then they come see us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, Councillor Green, then Councillor Ney.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Horan and Mr. Anderson for detailed comments in the report. Following on Councillor Braithwaite's questions regarding deadlines and dates and so on, this is really critical information for local businesses, and I'm speaking now as the BIA liaison. I would hope that we will be able to communicate the detailed information, including the expedited application process and the application process to the municipality for these folks, so that it's readily available to them. It sounds as though it could be confusing, and perhaps it would be really great of us if we would provide the proper information so they're all aware. And I'm hoping that will be done as this moves forward. And also making the information available on the website would be great too. And I am grateful for this report. I especially appreciated page 3, where you have listed 5 bullets for further consideration moving forward. And I think these are critical ones for me. I know that this has been a great boon to local businesses on the Avenue in particular. And I think it's been very helpful and helped businesses to cope and survive through this pandemic. My one concern is the pedestrian safety aspect, particularly on Oak Bay Avenue. And there have been a number of concerns expressed over these last 18 months by pedestrians about some of the crowding that occurred, I think particularly in front of the Penny Farthing and vis-a-vis. So I'm really glad to see these 5 bullets, and I'm assuming those will be incorporated into your planning process. I'm also glad to hear that there will be collaboration between engineering and planning services. I think that's really important. Wherever we can have collaboration, it provides another perspective on all the moving parts. So thank you very much. And those are my points. Thank you. And I will be supporting a recommendation here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I'm going to go to Councillor Ney and then Patterson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, thanks, Mr. Horan, for this report. And so my comment really just picks up on what Councillor Green was speaking to regarding pedestrian safety. And this is just a thought. I've heard this from a number of people, and I've seen this in our neighboring jurisdictions, Fernwood, Victoria, Cook Street, where expansion of restaurant seating goes into the street and then there's a blocking off of the street. And I'm no engineer, Mr. Horan, but it's just a thought with respect to safety, whether there's a way to block Oak Bay Avenue from Monterey to the north side of Hampshire, to maybe for just certain periods of the day and seasonally, I'm not sure, when there's most congestion and usership of the outdoor seating areas, that would give even more opportunity for businesses, create a more positive, congested sense of community in that section of the village area, and probably boost business, but I don't know. So it's just a thought of that as a way to address safety and boost business for the local restaurants and bars.
Thank you, Councillor Ney. I think you're touching on things as well that are going into what I think are going to be hot topics and as part of the village area planning process as well, in terms of how to activate some of those, the village areas more broadly. Were you seeking an answer from Mr. Horan on that, or just raising it as a point?
Well, could I ask Mr. Horan just to comment on, would that be something that you would consider, or is that off the table? I'm just wondering, or would you go out and consult with businesses, or is it a possibility, Mr. Horan?
I might actually even turn that over to Mr. Anderson. I think that's probably more of a planning discussion than the engineering side of things. Mr. Anderson, is that scope part of the consideration of the report coming back, or would that be more part of the village plan process?
Thank you, Your Worship, and not likely part of the scope of creating a patio permit system. That would likely just move into use of parking spaces at the greatest extent out from the business. I'll also comment that it's a great example of where that's actually a significant role for engineering review in our community in terms of the transportation system. And so that would be a great opportunity for some collaboration. And I think the village area plan is really the venue to start thinking about those opportunities. But having said that, if there's a wish to look at that in advance of that planning process, we can certainly look to doing that. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Anything else, Councillor Ney? Nope.
Well, I guess I'm just saying, I appreciate what our planner is saying, but I would like to see that looked at. I mean, again, I'm not an engineer or planner, but I do see these kinds of amendments being made in our neighboring municipalities. And so they've just opened up small sections of streets where there's pockets of restaurant bar type things to create these sort of pocket plazas, if you will. And they're temporary. They open them up, they kind of move them and they close them down and open them up at different times of the day. So I don't know. I don't know how the rest of the council feels about it, but I think it's worth looking at if it's particularly going to boost the business of our community and perhaps contribute to safety.
Thanks, Councillor Ney. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and to staff. I appreciate the report, although I guess I was surprised to see it come from engineering rather than building and planning. But because I do think of it as very much related to the planning department, certainly the use of temporary use of portions of the street for patios was a huge success, and our staff deserve credit for the quick response in doing that in dealing with pandemic. And I know it was greatly appreciated by the merchants and certainly also by residents in the community. So I'm happy to see this report come forward. Also support of the recommendation that it be remain in place until June 2022, but to have this go through as a single component item to strategic priorities. I have some difficulty with that. My preference would be that it be referred to the district's strategic priorities as a component of the village plan. And we really do need to get on with that village plan, because it's been great to have the extra patio cafe areas. That's been great. But at the same time, we haven't made progress on the safety of the pedestrian sidewalks. And so that, I think, is in my mind, a priority that needs to be accommodated. And certainly there was also discussion from some of the merchants in the village of the parking reserve fund monies and how they were going to be allocated for parking. And so certainly I see all of the 5 bullets on page 3, as I think Councillor Green mentioned, were really important items, but all of this really in the context of the village plan. So I'm happy to support certainly the first 2, but the recommendation that this go through as somewhat of a single item to strategic priorities, I find more problematic. I can't support that unless it is within the context of a component of the village plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Can I just ask a clarification, because my reading of that would be that would be the discussion we would have as strategic planning, is whether or not we could deal with this independently, or whether we could, take components of it and move it into that would be just moving it to strategic planning doesn't preclude it from having aspects or all of it being part of that 2023 delivery date for that piece. But so I don't know that they're actually, what you're saying is actually separate from what the recommendation is. So maybe I'll Mr. Anderson put his hand up, so maybe I'll just ask him that question, because he'll be determining. Go ahead, Mr. Anderson.
You don't want to be using that raise hand button all the time, I realize, but thank you, Worship. So it's just a timing piece. Yes, it would be a natural to look at these issues as part of the village area plan. We have potentially the issue of having businesses making application and wanting consideration for permanent patios well in advance of having an area plan investigate that. We plan to, sorry to use that, but we plan to work on the village area plan starting in the first part of 2022. We're going to be in the first quarter of 2022 and likely having to make decisions on applications for permanent patios. So from a timing perspective, they wouldn't line up terribly well. So if in fact we needed to develop a full system to review patios in advance of June 1st, 2022, we'd have to do that as a special project coming out of strategic priorities. We could potentially also, just for council's information, review those on a one-off, like on a case-by-case basis, in the absence of having a system in place for us. So I just thought I'd mention that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. So I'm not sure if that helps or not, Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And that is somewhat the way I read it, that then we would be working on this specific component when what I am desiring is a more holistic view of this. And I take your remarks well-intentioned, that your view was that this would be as part of the village plan, but it still seems to me that it is going to be in isolation, and it then starts to limit to some degree the openness of the freedom that we have. It starts to really rein in what we are doing in the village plan. And so my concern is that the sooner we could get the process of visioning of the village plan, the more helpful this will be, because I just can't support allocating the resources, the staff resources, to working on this specific item without having other things like safety on the sidewalks and the boulevard trees replanted and the use of the reserve funds that the merchants are always talking about. I think all of those have to be considered and dealt with. So I'm certainly happy to amend it to be added to the as a component of the village plan, but not as a single item, if that's the way we're going to do it.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any other hands raised at this point. Is there any members of the public that have indicated they wish to speak? I don't see any hands raised on my screen. Ms. Morden?
No, Your Worship, I'm not seeing any new phone numbers or hands raised.
Okay, thank you very much. I just my only comment is I think it is a little unfortunate that we are right at the cusp of doing the village plan, and we're now sort of tasked. I guess it would be lovely if we could extend temporary for another year or two, so we could sort of apply those rules as a permanent piece. But it sounds very much from what we've heard from the province so far is that they want this to either be permanent or gone. So I think we're dealing with the realities of that situation. I'm comfortable with the wording as the motion as it's laid out in the report at this point. I think that the nuances of prioritization and adding funds or other things to it has to be done within the strategic priorities process. I don't think we could do it any other way. So, and I think we have to at least we put some work in now on this, just given the timelines given by the province. So those are my reasons for supporting the motion as it's laid out here in front of us, but I'm happy to hear additional comments. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like to put the 3 recommendations from staff. I would move the 3 recommendations from staff.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Now, Councillor Patterson, did you wish to have them dealt with independently? I'm happy to do so if that's your desire.
That would be my preference, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll take movers and seconders for each of them in order. So the simplest one is obviously to move to receive. So let's get a hand moved and seconded for receipt. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion on the receipt? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you. And then the motion is that the current practice and guidelines related to temporary sidewalks and parking studies remain in place until June 1st, 2022. Is there a mover and a seconder for that? Mover and a seconder. Is there any additional discussion on that item? Yes, hands up for that. Go ahead, Councillor Green and then Zelka.
Thank you, Mayor. And just, I know that it was, it doesn't have to form part of the motion necessarily, but I really want to make sure that BIA members in particular on the Avenue receive communication from the municipality when appropriate regarding the process going forward, because I think that there might be some confusion, and I think it would be very helpful if we could clarify by being good partners, if we could clarify the application processes. So I don't know if that requires integration into the motion or if staff will take that as important comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I believe staff could take that as important takeaways. We're going to have to communicate pretty clearly on this one in terms of what the timing is. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair. Through you to staff. I presume that with respect to the temporary use of the street, we'll be staying with the street occupancy permits. There's no intention of changing that between now and June 1st, 2022. That would be the first question. The second question, I guess, is kind of related to the second one, which is the assumption is that for the moving forward, we would switch over to building and planning's maybe within the zoning, I presume, a patio space approach. Is that the assumption that staff is suggesting here in terms of the governance aspects?
Sure. I think probably both, Mr. Anderson, I think you're probably, despite the report coming from Mr. Haran, probably on the hook for both of those two.
Your Worship, I can start on this one. I
Okay.
think here, this is through you. The recommendation, as it's currently written in the report, the latter two parts of the recommendation, so the current practices and guidelines related to temporary sidewalks and parking stalls to June 1st, 2022, and the discussion of more permanent use of public space, those are meant to go together. And the idea being that the current practices that we have put in place as part of the pandemic response are meant to expire November 15th, 2021, based on your council's directions here. And the idea would be to extend those rules while further discussion and more permanent rules are put in place. So the answer is yes. The idea is to extend the current rules using street occupancy permit plus the relaxations of the street occupancy permit related to this issue, while other discussion about a more permanent solution is done going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt.
That's good enough for now. I'll leave the other half of my question until I guess the third part. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Zelka. Any other discussion on this item? Don't see any, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That passes. So I moved on to the third portion of this, and I just need a mover and seconder again, and we can have discussion. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Councillor Zelka, do you want to ask the second part of your question now then for that, which is the you're muted at the moment. There we go.
There we go. Okay, thank you very much. Yes, so obviously some design work will need to be done, and maybe some best practices from other municipalities might help to inform what this is going to look like. But yeah, it sounds like the assumption is that we would switch over to a building and planning approach and away from street occupancy permits. Is this what staff is suggesting? Would be first question I'll have.
Sure, thank you. I'll go with Mr. Horan or Mr. Anderson. Mr. Anderson, you're unmuted, so I'll go to you first.
Thank you, Worship. Short answer is yes. Would primarily be in a patio permit, typically comes out of the building and planning section. To get there would be in collaboration with our engineering group. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
This is new to me. So do these sorts of permits sit inside building and planning, like within the zoning bylaws, or do they stay in the streets and roadways bylaw? Like how do we work these things? Like this street occupancy, I completely understand, but the patio one I don't.
Mr. Anderson, go ahead. I mean, obviously some of this detail to come, but go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. No, the patio permits are ones that are typically within building and planning. They can be a zoning bylaw, they can be business license bylaw attached, they can be bylaws unto themselves that establish a patio permit system. So we have some choices, but they typically don't exist within a streets and traffic function. They still have the relationship to the public space, but they're usually housed, like I said, within a zoning, business, or a patio bylaw itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Last question, if I may. So whatever process we go with, I presume we're calling it like a permanent approach or a permanent type permit, but it is something that we can both give and then also take away. I presume these could have an end date or possibly a renewal process that we could simply not renew because we want to use the space for something else. So I just want to know how for what little a little understanding going forward. We're calling it permanent, but does it really mean we will lose control of that public space?
Thank you, Worship.
Go ahead, Mr. Anderson.
They're an annual. It's permanent because you have a system in place, but they're typically an annual permit process that you use, and you may include encroachment agreements to cover up any issues related to that. Not unlike what we've done with the streets occupancy permit.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Any other discussion on this? I know Councillor Patterson, you indicated you weren't going to support this portion of it. Any other, you may speak, or any other speakers at this time? Don't see any. So I'll call the question. So the motion is the third of those that that this essentially go into strategic priorities in 2022. So we're all sure we're on the same line item. Not seeing any other discussion, I'll call the question. All of those in favor? And those opposed? Councillor Patterson opposed. Thank you very much. That does carry. And I hope there's enough clarification from council there to help allow staff to be effective in their timing to come back with that with those recommendations. Moving on to next as number 8.6. We're back to another committee of the whole recommendation. Again, same role for members of the public. If they wish to address council, this is the time to, on this item, call in, hit *9 to raise your hand, or raise your hand within the Zoom application. So this is the Bowker Creek Initiative. There was a recommendation that came out of the Committee of the Whole that's in front of us. Perhaps I may just go to Mr. Horan to give a real quick reminder of this item for those watching for the first time, and then we'll go to council for any questions and a motion to move us forward. Go ahead, Mr. Horan.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The discussion at the Committee of the Whole, we went through providing some documents for council and the community, or for the committee and the community to review. Some of those are Bowker Creek blueprint refresh, an update on some of the last 10 years. So the first 10 years of the 100-year plan of the various municipalities' successes and places to celebrate, but also to talk practically of tools and actionable steps to continue on this 100-year plan for the district, or for the three all the partners related to the Bowker Creek watershed. And finally, this recommendation here was around the idea that natural assets in general in the Bowker Creek watershed, though they're seen and recognized as important places to put staff effort into, we haven't been resourced adequately over time to be able to spend more than what we've been doing so far. So the question was to bring it back to strategic priorities of financial planning, to have the discussion of levels of service and expectations about projects and timelines and schedules put to the council, so that we could have some solid direction going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Horan. Yeah, we had over an hour and a half, I believe, discussion on this at that meeting to bring it back here. So before I get to a motion, I'll take any questions, and I'll go to the public, and then I'll come back here for motions. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Well, sorry, I was going to make a motion, so I'll defer until you come back. Thank you.
Okay, well, let me just ask quickly then, Ms. Morden, is there anybody who has indicated they wish to speak to this item 8.6?
Your Worship, I'm not seeing any hand raised at this time.
No, either am I, so we'll go with that. So then back to you, Councillor Green.
Well, thank you. I was going to move the Committee of the Whole recommendation that the report titled Bowker Creek Initiative Update. Do you want me to read it, or?
No, just so we're clear that the further discussion of possible service level be referred to the district's strategic priorities and financial planning process. That's the one?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So moved. Is there a seconder?
Second.
Seconded. This had unanimous support at the Committee of the Whole, so I don't imagine there's a lot more to talk about on this, but any other discussions on this, on the motion as it sits? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. Another one coming out of the Committee of the Whole was the parking restrictions in the vicinity of St. Michael's School. And this was, again, direction from that body to move it back to a discussion with the surrounds. I'm going to ask the same question of the public. If they wish to address us, please at this time hit *9 to raise your hand, or raise your hand within the app. Before I go there, are there any questions of council? Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair. I don't remember what the vote was on this at Committee of the Whole. Is it possible staff could remind me what? Because I don't believe it was unanimous, but I also, the report doesn't sort of clarify as to what the recommendation was, or if it does, I couldn't find it.
Ms. Morden, do you have easy access to the minutes? We received them at the beginning of this meeting.
Apologize for that.
Nope, that's okay.
Yeah, if you just give me a couple of minutes, I can look that up.
Okay, before we vote, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion, any other questions at this point? Again, I'll make a call if anybody from the public wishes to address council. You can do so at this time. Not seeing any. I'll come back to this table as soon as we get that answer. My recollection was it was unanimous to
so, yeah.
this path, but we just will confirm that.
Sorry, Your Worship. Yes, it carried with no registered votes opposed.
Thank you. Any other questions? I just need a motion then to move this forward. Moved and seconded the recommendation. It's on the agenda. Any other discussion? Not seeing any. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Zelka opposed? Is that correct, Councillor Zelka? Okay, Councillor Zelka opposed. Thank you. We then move on to that carries. We move on to item number 8.8. This is Dogs on Willows Beach, Constraints and Options. Ms. Williams, who authored the report, is probably fortunately for her away on taking some time off. And so we have, I believe, Ms. Morton here to, or is it Ms. Varela that's going to walk us through the report?
Yes, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, Mayor. On the previous motion, I was voting against it, and
oh, sorry, I did not capture that.
Yeah, thank you. I had my hand up for quite a while, so.
Thank you for flagging that. It's hard to tell sometimes on these screens, so my apologies.
That's okay. So I just wanted, and do you want me to state my reasons?
Nope, that was to be done before the vote, so that's fine. You're good to go.
Okay. I had my hand up for quite a while. Okay, thanks.
Oh, my apologies. You're right. It appeared to be stuck up. So if you don't, why don't you do that just for the record, so people watching have a sense of the rationale for voting against. So go ahead.
So I just want to make sure I'm on the right topic, and that is the parking restrictions.
For St. Michael's, yeah, we're going to just allow you a little leeway here just to highlight why you voted in opposition.
I'm voting against it because I still don't feel that we've done the proper assessment of the entire area. And I think by doing this on one street in one area, we'll have implications for all the side streets. And a lot of those neighbors are very concerned about the overflow and parking on those side streets. And this has been an ongoing issue for them for as long as I've lived in Oak Bay. So I will not support the recommendation as stated. Thank you.
Okay, I don't want to go too far into this because you've already had the piece, but just so you're clear, the motion that came out was to direct staff to engage in further consultation with the entire surrounding neighborhood to identify those options, to address it more holistically. So that's the recommendation. That was made. That was the motion made.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
Mayor,
misunderstood.
I think that perhaps Councillor Green was on a different.
Yeah, the agenda was refreshed. The original agenda had the motion that was in the staff recommendation, and then the refreshed agenda has it updated with the recommendation that came out of the committee of the whole.
I apologize. So I withdraw my comments, and I do support the motion. I'm sorry for that.
Okay, thank you. No, it's my apologies. I should have caught the hand. And so the fault is on me, not on anybody else. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
And I apologize. I was going on the recommendations in the report. I did not see what I should have clarified. I guess the recommendations is to engage, not
correct.
To actually implement the 2-hour parking.
Okay.
That's correct.
Because I thought we were implementing the 2-hour parking.
No, sorry. My apologies. Obviously, I'm doing a bad job here late in the evening of making this clear.
Okay.
So are you in support of that motion then?
I am in support of engaging further and not to implement the 2-hour parking.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
So I think without any more formality, I'll take those votes as corrected, as being in favor, and that is passed unanimously. So thank you for that. My apologies, Ms. Morton, for the staff who have to follow along these missteps on my part. We will move on. Move on. It's good to have the clarity. So thank you for that. And go ahead.
And I do apologize to you and the council. Unfortunately, I was not able to get most of the staff reports until the last minute. I've got a problem with my iPad, but I think I've resolved it with staff. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Moving on now officially to number 8.8. Ms. Varela, why don't you kick us off here on the issues of dogs on Willows Beach?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just for ease of clarity, perhaps councillors could lower their hands so we don't do that again for the second round. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you, Your Worship, for that indulgence. As you know, the shoreline of Oak Bay, including Willows Beach, is located in the Victoria Migratory Bird Sanctuary. Importantly, cats and dogs are not permitted to be at large within the sanctuary as per federal regulations. For an animal to not be at large, an owner must have continuous and effective control of their animal, usually on a leash, but it could also include transport carriage or cage, attaching the animal to a static object, holding tightly on the animal's collar, or if you're really enthusiastic, holding the animal in the owner's arms. So it's key to understand when considering this issue that municipal bylaws can be used to add more stringent regulations to federal ones, but they can't be used to reduce those federal regulations. And at the May 17th, 2021 Committee of the Whole, the following recommendation was made: that staff bring back information about constraints of dogs on Willows Beach and options for a possible pilot program to allow dogs on the beach prior to 9 a.m. during the summer months. So this was put forward as currently dogs are restricted from being on Willows Beach from May 1st to September 30th. And this always represents a time when we receive complaints from people who previously were having their dog on the beach. So since that meeting, the district is now in receipt of correspondence from Environment and Climate Change Canada, dated June 10th, 2021, requiring us to remove reference of off-leash areas from our website mapping and associated content. So for greater clarity, the bylaw as it currently is written is in compliance with the federal regulations. It was the website and mapping and associated content where we were indicating off-leash areas were allowed that was out of alignment. So with that knowledge, Council has a number of options to consider, all of which are in alignment with federal regulations. Financial impacts other than the status quo are unknown at this time, and we would bring back information to Council based on complaints or volume of service requested. There's also a notation in the report that one option that potentially remains open to Council is lobbying for exemptions within the migratory bird sanctuary. That has gained no traction at the staff level, but it is something Council may wish to consider. With that, I'll take questions, Your Worship, when you're ready.
Thank you, Ms. Varela, for stepping in and for answering questions here. And again, the process here, I'm going to allow Council to ask questions of staff. We have one registered speaker, Ms. McLeod, so I'll go to her after the initial questions, and then we'll come back to this table for discussion and direction. So with that, any questions of Ms. Varela on the report at this time? I'm not seeing any hands jumping up, so I'm happy to go to the public at this point. Again, anybody watching can call in and hit *9 to raise your hand, but I will go to the registered speaker. I believe there's just the one speaker at this point who's registered to speak. You can unmute yourself. I believe you're in the meeting and you've unmuted yourself. You can just give your name and municipality of residence. And normally we ask you to keep it to around 2 or 3 minutes for your comments, Ms. So we have Ms. McLeod, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can, yes.
Okay, great. Jenny McLeod, I live in Oak Bay. I've written a letter twice to you, and I believe you've received many other letters concerning this idea of having dogs on the beach 6 to 9 a.m. So I would just like to speak to that a little bit. And I think I'm speaking for a lot of people. As you probably noticed, the majority of the letters were against that, even in spite of the on-leash stipulation. I don't want to repeat everything I wrote in my letter. So like so many people, I took to walking when the pandemic hit. I would walk through Uplands Park, over to Cattle Point, and finish on Willows Beach. On May 1st, when the dogs were no longer allowed on the beach, I experienced the absolute serenity, stillness, and peace the beach has to offer in the very early morning. I began to heal from the shock of the pandemic and the abrupt loss of my employment with the Victoria Symphony. Moreover, I saw birds resting and feeding in their habitat. They were undisturbed for the first time in months. I'm going to just quote a few things from an acquaintance of mine. The birds accept human presence, but are spooked by dogs on or off leash. They don't understand the difference for some reason. The well-meaning but uninformed suggestions that dogs be allowed before 8 a.m. doesn't recognize this basic fact. And it's not about birds being killed by dogs, it's about them being disturbed while eating and collecting food for incubating mates and nestlings. Their energy budgets are so tight that these interruptions can result in their exhaustion and death, and also in the loss of entire generations of offspring. People who think it's just my dog having a bit of fun doing what's natural are misinformed, irresponsible, and contributing to the steady loss of wild species, which is subtle until it suddenly isn't. And I have to tell you how moved I was by Mayor Haynes' discussion about the Kings Road green space, because I think it is in pretty much alignment with what I'm trying to say here. You're going to read a shocking and sickening story in today's Oak Bay News about a seal pup in Long Beach being harassed and nipped by an off-leash dog. The pup was under a severe stress. The owner of the dog did nothing until bystanders demanded the dog be put on a leash. The language and recommendations being put forth state that leash dogs are permitted. I believe it should state that the leashes must be non-retractable. I also believe the language must state that off-leash dogs are prohibited for the reasons you've already talked about. The majority of letters you received are very much against changing the time, and I hope you will give them your utmost consideration. For me, it's been such a bomb, and I know it has been for other people, and I really hope that, to be honest, the people and birds are given priority over the dogs. The people who want to be at Willows Beach with their dogs can do so on the esplanade or on the sidewalk. They can socialize, they can stand in awe at the beach as I do. They do not have to be on the beach where their dogs, as we all know, will leave deposits that are extraordinarily unhealthy and dangerous. And those dogs are going to want to run and chase birds. There's no question about it. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. McLeod, and thanks for sitting through a long meeting today to have a chance to speak. We did get your written correspondence, but it's always nice to hear from people as well. So thank you for that. Ms. Morden, is there any other speakers who have indicated they wish to speak on this item?
No, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have back to this table, or go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to get started with moving receipt of the report.
Sounds good. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on that? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Those opposed? None opposed. Can I just, before we get to any other motions, can I just get a motion to extend the meeting? I think 10:30 should be sufficient time for us to get through this and all of the procedural pieces following. And we have members of UVic and people waiting patiently as well to get to them. So is moved and seconded for extension to 10:30. Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you for that. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Your Worship. So with respect to the options presented in the report, I would like to move option 4 in the staff report to maintain the status quo for dog access on Willows Beach.
Second.
There's moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on that? I have Councillor Appleton, Braithwaite, or in that order. Councillor Appleton, anything else to add?
Well, I would just
the status
note,
quo is pretty straightforward.
It is pretty straightforward, but I just note, as the caller mentioned, and as council has obviously been made well aware, we've received extensive community feedback to maintain the status quo in favor of maintaining things the way that they are. I would note that I want to make it clear with respect to access for dogs. I see very clearly that, especially with the closure of the UVic dog park space, that there is a discussion needed to happen around where expanded dog use may be appropriate. And I will note that this is precisely the reason, as mentioned in the staff report, that there's a larger process being undertaken to determine how we would revise our animal control bylaw and how we would evaluate additional areas for dog off-leash areas. So there is a larger process going on there that I feel responds to the larger community interest in dog access. This, in my view, does not support an ad hoc change to a bylaw that protects an important bird habitat. So thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you so much. I would totally agree with Councillor Appleton's comments. And I would like to add that I also really feel that we have to fast track having an off-leash park for dogs. In Saanich, what they've done is they put, and I know sadly in Oak Bay, we don't often have a pool of money to put towards something like this, but perhaps we could find it somewhere. But I know that Saanich has put $30,000 towards doing pop-up off-leash dog parks throughout Saanich. And perhaps that's something that in the interim for this important population of our residents who have dogs and who are looking for an off-leash park, perhaps that's something that we could do. But yes, I'm very much in favor of the status quo, no change, but yes to but that's option number 4 also includes saying yes to adding the outstanding bylaw amendment that we have had on the books for a little while. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor Green and Councillor Nay.
Yes, thank you. And I respect my colleagues' comments. However, I will not be supporting option 4. I would have supported the staff recommendation, and I'll tell you why. Having gone through this issue in another community, it is extremely divisive. And really looking for a compromise solution, I believe option 1 represents that compromise solution. And we could always reassess or reevaluate option 1 at a later time. There are almost 1,500, certainly well over 1,400 licensed dogs in Oak Bay. I suspect there are more than that, but are probably not licensed. And I think we have a population of dog owners that have a voice. And I respect Ms. McLeod's comments, and I certainly respect the comments of people that are against having dogs on Willows Beach. But I think if they're leashed, I really feel that is a good compromise. And again, it could be assessed for its success. So I will not be voting for this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green, for your clear comments as well. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka. Oh, sorry, Councillor Nay. I have next, and then Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, yeah, I won't be voting in favor of this option. I actually would have gone for option 1 too. And my reasons are, I walk down this beach most days of the week, at least 5 days of the week. And my observation since the over the past while, since we've not allowed dogs on the beach during these months, these summer months, is the number of geese that have populated the beach. It's quite. I was down there the other day. I'm sure there were 200 geese on the beach, and so Ms. McLeod's comment that I guess the dogs do spoof the birds to some degree. It is not inaccurate, but it's the geese that are clearly overpopulated that down there. And I think as a community, we've kind of used Oak Bay Willows as a people beach. And there's not nesting birds down there. There's so many people, and in the past there have been the dogs walking when there are not nesting birds. So the status quo basically, it's not addressing the concerns of the federal legislation. We're increasing the number of geese, which if we're concerned about, the pooping thing, the geese are pooping like 10 times more than what the dogs do. And at least with the dogs, the owners are picking up 99% of the poop. So when I saw people walking down there with their dogs on leash, I do appreciate it as a different kind of an energy, but I find dog owners on that part of the beach very responsible. I guess one thing I would consider if the council was going to consider option 1 is the idea of non-retractable leashes to keep the dogs tighter to owners to mitigate the bother that some because the dogs bother some people but not other people. So I thought option 1 with a restricted time when there's not children and a lot of people on the beach was a reasonable compromised option that would allow dog owners to walk their dogs during this real difficult time. I mean, Ms. McLeod makes a really good point. This has been a difficult time for people with dogs and for people without dogs. So, yeah, so I don't support the status quo. I think this other option is a compromise.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ney. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. This is a tough one for me. I would be happy with one. I'd be happy with the one that's being proposed. I would prefer actually going with option one. So I guess I'll vote against this option, and for the following reasons. With respect to the pandemic and people being at home, I think dog walking is very important, and for people to get out of the houses. I appreciate the compromise that was put forward in the other option that we may be able to test later on, with respect to the fact that it was on leash. If the concern truly is to save birds with respect to nesting birds, I'd rather us focus on cats as opposed to dogs, in particular on willows, since cats kill millions of birds. A huge majority of the bird deaths are attributed to cats and not dogs. I appreciate the comments from Councillor Ney with respect to all the geese, because I was down there on Willows Beach last week, and I was amazed at how many geese were there. And all the geese on Willows Beach reminded me of how sometimes Cadborough Bay, it has high fecal coliform levels. You know, as the representative on the Water Commission, and just noting, you know, some of the fecal coliform levels that close some of our beaches. Quite often, the fecal coliform levels with respect to Cadborough Bay are traced back to Hobbs Creek and Mystic Vale, and in particular the geese. So I take Councillor Ney's comments to heart. Maybe the odd dog on leash might help to control some of the geese along willows. So, as a compromise, I thought I would be voting against this option. Hopefully, we can test option one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I have Councillor second time speakers here, Councillor Appleton and Ney. But maybe if Councillor Appleton, you didn't have you didn't take much to in your motion, so I'll give you that opportunity. Then I'll speak, and then I'll go to second time speakers. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate the opportunity to speak again. I would just note that the provisions of the Federal Migratory Bird Sanctuary are not exclusively confined to the protection of birds on nests. It is to protect migratory birds from being harassed. So there are many different transitory bird species that use the bay. This is not exclusively for the protection of nests. I will note that in the correspondence from Environment and Climate Change Canada, they note numerous complaints from the public regarding the negative interaction of off-leash dogs with migratory birds. Which I think is a consistent and ongoing problem, irrespective of the individual of people's interpretation or appreciation for geese and their leavings. They are a protected species under the Federal Migratory Bird Convention Act. So these are all things which are regulated federally. So I hesitate for us to take an approach that in terms of how we would manage birds or what impacts dogs do or do not have on those migratory birds. The direction and the expectation from the federal government is fairly explicit in their letter. So I would just make that notation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. You know, I think like everybody else struggled with this one a little bit about the wisest course of action forward. Certainly, I have a dog that loves that beach, and May 1st every year shoots daggers at me when she can't get back on the beach again, and I think it is a real boon to people to be able to get on there and spend that time. That being said, it is the destination beach of Greater Victoria, and I've always supported that May 1st deadline simply for the reason that people need to know that when they're coming here, it's clean and taken care of. And you could make the argument that the dogs being on the leashes would help alleviate that, because they're much more under sight than they are without. But I'm at this point don't see a compelling enough reason to change it now. I actually would probably support this change should we also look at the bigger picture of other off-leash dog areas, so we understand where this should be absorbing the overflow and where it shouldn't. But at this time, I think, especially where people need a certain amount of sanctity and things, I'm comfortable with the status quo for now, and so I'll support the motion as it's being laid out here. Councillor Zelka.
Oh, thank you for letting me speak a second time. I forgot to mention, for me, there is a compelling reason to consider voting against option 4 and possibly considering maybe option 1, because of the UVic dog park closure has really, I think, thrown a wrench into a lot of people's plans and a lot of people's approaches to how we deal with this legal pet within Oak Bay. So because we have on our 2023 work plan, a full review of the whole dog, I think it was referred to as the third rail by Mayor Haynes in his presentation. I thought that was an excellent presentation. This is an issue that is a bit of a hot button for lots of people. And I appreciate the fact in 2023, we're going to be dealing with this hot potato again. That if we considered maybe from 6 to 9 o'clock in the morning as a pilot program, that could potentially feed into the results on the 2023 work plan. So that's why I'll be voting against. Thank you.
Thank you. Second time speakers, I have Green and then Braithwaite.
Yeah, just very quickly, I think my concern is that we are not providing any other options, as Councillor Zelka points out. The closure of UVic, we have no enclosed areas in Oak Bay. So it's just sort of an all or nothing approach at this point. We are still in pandemic. We may be coming out of pandemic slowly, but I think people still have that need to interact on a beach with a dog. And furthermore, we are driving dog owners in Oak Bay to Saanich, to Cadbur Bay. So there is some inequity here, I feel. And I really feel that compromise is an important issue on dogs and dogs in our community. And I feel badly that they are completely restricted at this point from Willows, from the beach itself. So those are my further comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Braithwaite, then Patterson, then Nay.
Would you like to go to Councillor Patterson as a first-time speaker, or are you okay with coming to me?
Sure, I'll go to Councillor Patterson and then Councillor Braithwaite. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. I will be supporting the motion as presented. And listening to everybody, there is no perfect solution here. I realize that. Other than although I don't own a dog, I had my neighbor's small dog that I walked for almost 6 years. I enjoyed being on the beach with the dog. I also enjoyed the rest of the walks that we took all over the community in the season when we didn't go down to the beach. And we're very fortunate in Oak Bay that we have so many trails that we can enjoy. But and if I go back to the response by Councillor Green, that we're driving people to Cadbur Bay, well, really, as Mayor Haynes pointed out, they're going to Cadbur Bay for the reason that this issue first started, and that was to have off-leash dogs on the beach. I don't think that the offer of the on-leash is going to be greatly welcomed. I think that's going to be another difficult conversation to have. And as Mayor Haynes indicated, it's something that they are going to have to deal with at Cadbur, because they're going to have to change the situation there also. So while it's disappointing, I think that, the system that we have had on Willows Beach has worked, I think, to the betterment of the community and the residents here. It's a shared concept. And it, certainly during pandemic, there were more people wanting access to the spaces. That is changing. And so I think we're going to not have quite as much demand, but I really think the having the on leash is not going to satisfy the request that council first received. So I think the status quo is probably our best option, although I do hear what the other members of council have said. To find a solution to having a fenced off-leash dog area would be an ideal situation and something to work towards. So, but I will be supporting the motion as presented.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite, the nay, and I think we've mostly gone through the arguments here, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but go ahead and take the time you need.
Yeah, thank you. I actually was going to, I'll just reiterate what Councillor Patterson mentioned. I was going to mention about the transition to on leash. I don't think that's going to be well received by our dog owners. And I really hope that as a council, we can fast track and something for an off leash park and put some money into our budget for an off-leash park for dogs, because I think it's so very important. But based on all of the correspondence that we received, I'm definitely supporting option 4.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. I have Councillor Nay, and I'm not sure if Councillor Patterson, you wish to speak again, if that's just a hand up. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Nay. So
my final comment, Mr. Mayor, is really, I do hear what many of our letter writers have spoken to, but my final comment is that I feel comfortable. It's not easy, but I do feel comfortable because the on-leash access to the beach is in compliance with the Federal Migratory Bird Sanctuary regulation, where they have thought and provided expertise about the protection of migratory birds with on-leash access to these waterfront areas. So with that in mind, I'm comfortable that this does not compromise the migratory bird health or well-being.
Thank you very much, Councillor Nay. I think we've had the discussion here and not seeing any more hands. The motion on the floor is to maintain the status quo related to early mornings, but to continue, of course, with the prohibition of dogs south of Belker Creek in that area. Any other discussion at this point, or I'm ready to call the question? I will call the question then. All those in favor of this option 4, hands. And those opposed, Councillor Nay, Councillor Green, and Councillor Zelka are opposed. I will remain in favor, so that does carry, and that keeps the status quo in place. So I think it does behoove us to start looking at some temporary options. Yes, go ahead, Councillor Nay.
I just want to make sure, did Councillor Patterson vote the way she wanted to? She did. Okay, so she changed her mind. Okay, I was just checking. Thank you.
Thank you. It's always good to check, especially in this format as demonstrated, errors can happen. So thank you for that. Moving on now to item section number 9. And these are not subject to public input, which will move things along a little bit closer. We have up first, we have a registered speaker on this. It's interesting. Oh yeah, this is for the development permit 2230 Caddo Bay Road. And with some exterior renovations for consideration of approval. And I'm not sure who is presenting this today. Is it Mr. Anderson or is it Ms. McDougall? Who is our speaker today? Go ahead, Mr. Anderson. I'll let you introduce yourself or whoever else is going to be introducing this item.
Thank you, Worship. No, our Kevin Weber, our planning technician, will be providing an introduction to this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, Mr. Weber.
Thank you, Worship. Can you hear me all right?
We can, thank you.
Excellent. The District of Oak Bay is in receipt of a development permit application to undertake exterior renovations to an existing multifamily building located at 2230 Cabra Bay Road. The property is located on the north side of Cabra Bay Road between East Down Road and Bowker Avenue and is approximately 2,836 meters squared in area and has RM3 zoning designation and a multi-unit residential OCP designation. The existing 4-story apartment building was built in 1969 and houses a total of 43 multifamily residential dwelling units. The intent of the proposed works is to update a number of aging features on the building envelope, including removing and replacing existing windows, doors, trim, privacy screens, and balcony railings. The applicant is proposing to use modern materials to replace the original materials used on the building, including using aluminum and tempered glass balcony railings to replace the existing wooden balcony railings. No trees are proposed to be removed as part of the proposal, and tree protection measures are to be put in place to protect existing on-site mature trees throughout construction, and no change to the canopy coverage is required or proposed, and the existing canopy cover exceeds the required 20% canopy cover at 28%. The application was reviewed at the June Advisory Design Panel meeting, and the panel noted that the proposal is an excellent example of an aesthetically pleasing modernization of an aging building that increases both the sustainability and longevity of the building, and recommended that council consider the approval of the proposal as presented. As the subject property is located within the multifamily development permit area, the proposed alteration is the proposed alterations to the balconies are subject to review in accordance with the multi-unit residential development permit area guidelines. The proposed works do not increase the footprint of the building, affect setbacks, or impact views. There are no privacy or shadowing issues with neighboring properties, and the landscaping is to remain as is. Staff have determined that the proposed alterations serve to both modernize and improve the quality of the appearance of the building and the existing balconies on the multifamily building on the subject property, and the proposal is in keeping with the multi-unit residential development permit area guidelines. The proposal was also found to conform with the zoning bylaw, official community plan policies, and no variances are being requested as part of the proposed works. So therefore, staff consider the proposal to be supportable and ready for council consideration, and staff are requesting that council direction on this application. And I believe the applicants, Eddie and Cedar Williams, are in attendance tonight to answer any questions council may have.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Weber. I believe this is a reasonably straightforward piece, but we'll take any questions that can go to either staff or to the applicant. So I have Councillor Ney up first. Go ahead.
Mr. I just realized as this was being explained to us, I probably should recuse myself for perception of a conflict, because I live right beside this building.
Okay. That
So
is.
how should I do that? Should I just?
If you don't mind, if you could just mute your screen but keep your video on, and I'll wave at you to welcome you back. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So with that recusal, thank you, Councillor Ney, which you can't hear me. We have this. Are there any questions of council to the applicant or to staff on this? No, I don't see any. Can we get a motion then? Oh, sorry. Well, a mover and a seconder is fine to approve it. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka. You have your hand raised.
Oh, thank you very much. Just a quick question through you to the proponent. Just seeing what's happened down in the States, is there any concerns with earthquake aspects of the building? Just wanted to ask whether there was any suggestion on things that might have been done with respect to that hazard. I just thought I would ask whether as part of this development process, they're looking at anything like that.
Sure, I'll put the question. And if Mr. Williams or Ms. Williams, I'm not sure, is here,
yes,
you don't. Yeah, so welcome. You can answer that as best you can. It's not part of the application.
But no, I'm curious. Thank you.
That consideration was not part of the scope of work at all. It was purely form and character for DP.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Any other discussion?
I'll make the motion to receive, and that the development permit DP 000034 to undertake exterior renovations to a multifamily building at 2030 Cabra Bay Road be approved.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any other discussion? Councilor Zucker, your hand is still up. I just want to make sure I don't do what I did before. Okay, we're good. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. I will then wave frantically. Councilor Ney, if you can see me, come back in. There we go. Turn your audio. Is your audio back on, Councilor Ney? Councilor Ney, can you hear us talking at this point?
I can hear you. Can
Okay,
you hear
good.
me?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's good. I just wanted to make sure you were fully back into the meeting.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Williams, for attending what has been a long meeting to answer any questions that had they arisen. Moving on to item number 9.2, we are moving to again. We have I'm not sure again who's presenting this one. I'll leave it to is it Mr. Weber again who's going to present this?
Yes, that's correct, Your Worship.
Okay, great. So we have upland setting and design for 3220 Exeter Road. Welcome, Mr. Weber, to give a brief overview of the application.
Great, thank you, Your Worship. The District of Oak Bay is in receipt of an upland and site and design application to undertake exterior renovations to a home located at 3220 Exeter Road. The subject property is located on the west side of Exeter Road between Lansdowne Road and Beach Drive, is approximately 1,767 meters squared in area, and has an RS2 zoning designation and Uplands OCP designation. The existing single-family home was built in 1996, and the intent of the proposed works is to allow for more natural light to enter the residence by altering the existing home fenestration. This includes replacing a portion of the existing brick front door surrounded with glass, as well as adding additional glass doors and windows to the west and south elevations of the residence. All materials and finishes proposed to be used are to match those existing on the residence, ensuring the original style of the home is preserved. No trees are proposed to be impacted as part of the proposal, and due to the minor nature of the works, the applicant is not required to meet the 45% canopy coverage target required for the property within the tree preservation bylaw, and the existing 31% canopy cover is to remain as is. The application was reviewed at the June Advisory Design Panel meeting, and the panel noted that the proposal enhances the natural light into the home and recommended that council consider the approval of the proposal as presented. As the subject property is within an area designated as the uplands within the district's official community plan, staff reviewed the proposal for conformance with upland study and design guidelines. We noted that there is to be no increase of the footprint of the home, effect on setbacks, impacts to views, privacy, shadowing of neighboring properties, and existing on-site landscaping is to remain as is. And the staff have determined that overall the proposed alterations to the single-family home will improve the appearance of the residence and are in keeping with the upland siting and design guidelines. And the new elements will add visual interest to the home while not having any significant impact on the streetscape. The proposal was also found to conform to the zoning bylaw, official community plan policies, and no variances are being requested. Therefore, staff consider the proposal to be supportable and ready for council's consideration. And staff are requesting that council give direction on this application. And for this one, I believe Marshall Cooper, the applicant, is in attendance for this. If council has any questions, thank you.
Very good, Mr. Weber. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Cooper, for attending. We'll see if there's any questions for either staff or the applicant on this. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you, Mayor. In fact, I was going to move the staff recommendation, both receipt and approval. I was at the ADP meeting in June.
Before you talk, and is there a seconder for that motion? Moved and seconded. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
No, just quickly, I attended the ADP meeting and heard the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion or questions from council on this item? Not seeing any. I'm happy to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Mr. Cooper, again, thank you for sitting through a long meeting for what was a fairly straightforward application, but it is often worthwhile to come in case there is anything meaningful that comes up that people have found in the application. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. And up next, we have item number 9.3. This is our first of two UVic pieces. This one is for council review, and if council finds it worthy, we'll be giving notice will be given. So I'm just going to give it to Mr. Anderson. I'm not sure who's. Oh yes, Councillor Ney, you wish to recuse yourself?
Yeah, I'm going to recuse because that's my place of work during the daytime.
So Councillor Ney, you are the last two items are UVic. So why don't you can adjourn yourself for the evening at that point. So
okay,
I think you took a job at UVic just to get out of here early.
Thank you. Night,
Thank you,
all.
Councillor Ney.
Your Worship, Kaylin McDougall will be presenting on the two UVic items. Thank you.
Thank you. And welcome, Ms. McDougall. I think this is the first time you've had a chance, as it was for Mr. Weber, to present to council on land use planning pieces. Before you begin, though, it is 10:26, and we need some time to get through these. I think certainly 15 minutes to 10:45. So can we get a motion to extend the meeting to 10:45? Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. I know it's late, but we have to get through this in a meaningful way. Thank you, Ms. McDougall, who is a fairly recent addition to our planning staff. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here. Can you hear me all right?
We can hear you very clearly. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Your Worship. So returning this evening for Council's consideration is a development variance permit application for the construction of the National Center for Indigenous Laws located at 3800 Finnerty Road. The center will provide academic and support space.
Wait, I think, Ms. McDougall, are we doing the laws one first or the engineering building first? I think we're on 9.3. Yeah, 9.3 for, oh, wait a second.
Nope, you're correct. I'm the one who's incorrect here. My apologies.
Okay. All right, I'm going to hand it back over to you then for the engineering building overview. Welcome back, Ms. McDougall.
Thank you so much. Okay, so before council for consideration is a requested parking variance and building height variance for a proposed development at 3800 Finnerty Road. The University of Victoria is proposing an expansion to its engineering and computer science facilities. The development would include an addition to the existing engineering and computer science building, as well as the construction of a high bay research and structures lab. These facilities will provide additional space for design studios, laboratories, offices, and research. The development will be located near the southern portion of the campus's core, bordered by other academic buildings to the north and forested areas to the west and to the south. 96 trees will require removal to accommodate the proposed buildings, and 185 replacement trees are required to be planted within the Oak Bay boundary as per the tree protection bylaw. The university has set their own replanting ratio of 3:1, which actually exceeds that of the districts. So with regards to the parking variance, the proposed development is anticipated to accommodate 500 students approximately, therefore generating a bylaw requirement to provide 250 parking stalls. The existing 12 parking spaces in the area of construction will be displaced by the new high bay research and structures lab. 3 new accessible parking spaces and 2 loading spaces will be added along Ring Road, but other than that, no additional parking is proposed. Now, the proposed development will be centrally located, close to parking lots and transit stops. Additional cycling infrastructure, including 106 bicycle parking spaces, 8 end-of-trip facilities, and a new separated bicycle pathway adjacent to Ring Road will be provided with the development. Furthermore, transportation demand measures at the university are proving to be effective at reducing vehicular traffic to and from the campus. And as of 2018, the overall vehicle driver mode share is now below 38%. Generally speaking, the OCP policy provides support for campus development and the implementation of the university's transportation demand management strategies. And now with regards to the height variances, the proposed construction overall does comply with the zoning bylaw, with the exception of the requested height variances. The High Bay Research and Structures Laboratory is proposed to be 18.5 meters in height at its tallest point, and the expansion of the engineering building is proposed to be 31.13 meters high. The proposal to increase building heights is consistent with the scale and massing of some of the adjacent buildings on campus. And the buildings have generally been designed to decrease shading and view impacts on adjacent buildings. They've also been designed to provide a more human scale along Ring Road, which is of benefit to the pedestrians. The environmental impact of the larger buildings will be mitigated by using mass timber to reduce GHG emissions. Finally, the nearest residential property is located approximately 300 meters away from this portion of the campus, and therefore the increased building height will not impact residential views or access to sunlight. Overall, the proposed engineering and computer science facilities have been well designed to utilize the available land and help create a compact campus. Should council consider to wish to move forward with the application, staff would proceed with written notification to adjacent property owners and residents with 50-meter radius. A proposal would then come back at a subsequent council meeting for consideration of any public input and a final resolution. With that, staff are requesting council direction. And I would also just note that I believe we have Mike Wilson, who's a representative from the university, and his team here in the instance that council has any questions for them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. McDougall. And yes, welcome, Mr. Wilson and team. You've also been sitting through a very long meeting to get at this opportunity to answer questions. I'm going to go to council. Are there any questions from council of staff or of the applicants at this time? Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a really quick question. When I was looking at the drawings, I noticed that there's a high plume exhaust fan stack, and it says that the final height is to be determined. I'm specifically looking at page 19 in our package, but the drawing is A402-B. I'm just wondering why. What would be the reason behind not knowing how high the exhaust fan stack would be?
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Go to Mr. Wilson for that one. He may know the answer, or hand it off to another team member.
Yeah, perhaps I'll ask one of the architects to step forward and provide some detail here.
Sure, thank you. Is there a...
Yeah, hello, I'm Esteban Mateus, architect. Hello, everybody. The final model of these plume fans is yet to be determined, but it is roughly to scale there based on the model we've been using so far. There's a bunch of other similar high velocity fume exhausts on UVic, and it's very common for fume hoods from lab buildings to have these.
So
does that answer your question?
I think so. Sorry, thank you, Mayor. I think so. Approximately how high above the highest point of the roof will that be? It looks to me like it's going to be about 6 or 8 feet higher than the roof, perhaps, maybe?
Mr. Mateos?
Yes, thank you. I would say, yeah, it's about 4 meters, 4 to 5 meters max from the top of the top parapet there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of the applicant or staff at this time? Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair. With respect to the plume fans, having taken my engineering at University of Toronto, this building does remind me to some extent of some of the labs that I had a chance to work in there, and the plume fans are quite reasonable and in accordance with the purpose built of the building. Thank you. I'm actually very impressed with the design. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any other questions? And if there's no questions, we can get to motions, and we can have discussions around any motions. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite. No.
I would make the motion as per to receive and as per the agenda.
Sure.
I'll second.
So this will give direction to give notice for neighbors at this point. So moved and seconded. Any other discussion on this item? Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you. Since 3800 or the address of this place is, I guess all buildings on the campus have the same address, which is sometimes confusing for us. Looking at all these different buildings with the same address. To whom will be given notice? Since it's such a large campus.
Sure. Ms. McDougall, what is you can remind us again of the notification range for buildings on campus?
Absolutely. Thank you, Your Worship. It is 50 meters from the property. So with the example that we'll be speaking to next, we send out the notification to 48 properties in Oak Bay and Saanich in total. That was obviously a request related to the last or for the other development variance permit application for this property, but it was 48 and 50 meters is the radius.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Any other discussion? I don't see any. I'll just make a brief comment. I just appreciate the level of detail and design work that goes into this. These are complicated buildings, and I know there's an enormous amount of work on the campus to keep as much green space as possible and to group type work together to make it efficient as an operation. And the standards undertaken by the university for energy efficiency and architectural design is second to none, and it's very much appreciated. I think raising the standard and setting examples for so much of the region in this process as well. I look forward to hearing back from the neighbors on this if there's any concerns raised, but on the face of it, I certainly see it has merit to go forward. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just very quickly, I would just make a note that I'm very appreciative of the lengths that UVic goes to evaluate transportation demand management to reduce the mode share on private vehicles. And I think that, the investment that Council helped support recently at UVic to create more active transportation, more bike paths, that type of infrastructure facilitates us being able to allow or consider a variance that allows for significantly less parking than what would have historically been there because that mode shift happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Any other discussion at this point? Not seeing any. I will call the question then. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. So notification will go out to neighbors on that item. And we move on to the final item of the agenda tonight, which is item 10.1. And Ms. McDougall, I believe we have you back again for this one.
Thank you, Your Worship. So returning this evening for Council's consideration is a development variance permit application for the construction of the National Center for Indigenous Laws located at 3800 Finnerty Road. The center will provide academic and support space for up to an additional 100 students, resulting in a bylaw requirement of 50 additional parking stalls. No new vehicle parking stalls are proposed on the university campus related to this specific project, and as such, a parking variance has been requested. The proposed development has been designed to align with the university's transportation demand management efforts to reduce vehicle mode share. And generally speaking, the district's OCP policy supports campus development and the implementation of the university's transportation demand management strategies. The applicants have provided a parking demand analysis with evidence that no additional parking stalls are required to accommodate the proposed development. And again, the location of the development is centrally located, nearby transit stops, and several large parking facilities. Amenities for cyclists have been integrated into the proposed development plans. The staff have reviewed the proposed development plans, as well as the reduced parking in context with the relevant OCP policies and overall site design, and context with the surrounding area, and considered the proposal to be supportable. At its meeting of June 14th, Council directed staff to give notice of intent to consider this development variance permit application for approval. Notice was subsequently mailed to 48 adjacent property owners and residents, including Saanich properties, within a 50-meter radius, and that was sent out on June 30th, 2021. Now, correspondence advising of the proposed parking variance was also shared with the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations as well. No correspondence has been received by the Building and Planning Department. Council may now consider approval of the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. McDougall. And the same team is here to answer any questions from the university as well. So I will take any questions. If I get to motions, go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. Through you to the proponent. With respect to the use of this building, I imagine at times elders will be visiting. And elders don't always use bicycles. I was wondering if any special provisions have been made with respect to mobility accommodations, possible extra parking, possible extra ramps, possible extra aspects to assist the potentially expected elders' use of this building. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Is that, I'll give that to Mr. Wilson.
Thank you. Through Mayor Murdoch, there is a parking lot immediately north of the building, which does include accessible parking. That's parking lot 8. We are also retaining a loading zone on McGill Road, which is adjacent to the front entry of the existing building. So that loading area would be maintained through the development. We do have long-term plans to develop cycling infrastructure along McGill Road, but we'll be working again to maintain that lay-by there so that there can be pickup and drop off for elders who may be attending ceremony in the building.
Great. Thank you very much. Any other discussion? So if I can get a motion, perhaps we can talk to the motion. Just moving the recommendation. So again, removing a receipt and approval of the.
Yeah. I'll move receipt and approval of the DVP 00110 to undertake construction of the National Center for Indigenous Laws, et cetera, et cetera.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you very much. It's nice to have those read out so that's clear for the audio record. Any other discussion on this item? Mr. Anderson, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Worship. Just want to make sure that we ask the public if there's any comments.
Oh, my apologies. Yes, thank you. I was skipping from 9, which didn't have public input, to 10, which does. So thank you for that reminder. My quality of chairing drips dramatically after 10 o'clock, I will say. My preference would be like I leave earlier. If there are any members of the public, this will be the last chance for you to make any comments. As per the rest of the meeting, you can hit *9 to raise your hand if you're calling in. Or you can hit the, or if you're in the meeting on Zoom, you can, of course, just use the reactions tab to indicate your desire to speak. And thank you, Mr. Anderson, for that reminder. Clearly out of practice here a little bit. For a variance application, we always go to the public for a final piece. As noted, there has been no input provided to date in that call out for input. I don't see any hands being raised. Ms. Morden, is there anybody from the public who has indicated they wish to speak?
Your Worship, I'm not seeing any hands either. And I'm also not seeing any new phone calls into the meeting.
Okay, so with that, we have the motion is live on the floor for discussion. Any other discussion? Oh, I see one phone number there. Is that someone wishing to speak? Is it phone number, a 604 phone number ending in 935?
Your Worship, I believe that's the transportation engineer for the project.
Okay, they're just unmuted at the moment, so I just wanted to capture that.
If you can hear me, that's correct.
Okay, perfect. We can hear you. You can hit *6 to remute yourself. Okay, thank you.
Sure, okay.
So with that, we'll come back to this table. I don't see any other discussion. So before I call the question, I just want to express my my excitement to see this expansion happening. I think the law school and the innovation that's happening there is, again, a bit of a showcase for this region in the world. I have my brother-in-law teaches Aboriginal law in U of T and has been raving about this this project for quite a long time. So I'm very excited to see it moving forward here. With that, I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That carries. That concludes with 1 minute to spare. We need a motion to adjourn.
Move adjournment.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for sitting through the meeting. That was a long meeting, and very much appreciate you being here, to being available to answer any questions should they arise. Have